Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to our Workplace Wellbeing and Mental Health Summit. It's so lovely to be here with you today. I'm Malvika Jetmalani, dialing in from Chicago. And today is day 3 of our summit, and we're going to kick it off with the topic Beyond Benefits, Creating a Workplace that Truly Supports Mental Health, Redesigning Policies, Workflows, and Work Environments for Long-Term Success. Now, we would love to know where you are connecting from, so please let us know in the comments. And while you're doing that, I want to say a big thank you to Jessa, Sneha, and the rest of the Hacking HR team backstage, doing all of the hard work necessary to bring us this incredible content and programming. We have a great discussion planned for you today, so Jessa, if you wouldn't mind, please bring our panelists onto the screen. Welcome, panelists. Great to see you all. And before we dive into the topic, we'd love to hear a little bit about your background. So we'll introduce our panelists and we'll go clockwise as you appear on my screen, starting with you, Mandy.
Sure. I'm Mandy Kuchide. I'm physically located in Asheville, North Carolina, the western part of North Carolina. And I've been in the people operations, human resources space for about 16 plus years. Right now, I'm the VP of People and co-founder at the Fresh Perspective Group, which is a consulting firm that specializes in technology consulting for nonprofits. So I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. Stephanie.
Good morning. Hello, my name is Stephanie Lemick. I am based out of the Phoenix, Arizona area. I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called the Wounded Workforce. We're focused on building trauma-informed workplaces and mental health advocacy in the workplace. Prior to that, I spent nearly 2 decades as an in-house HR leader. So always love getting to spend time with my HR friends because I know these are the folks doing so much of the work driving meaningful change in organizations. So thank you so much for letting me be here.
Thank you. Nadia.
Hi, my name is Nadia Aaron. I do HR consulting and fractional people operations for companies that are startups or scaling companies going through change management in some sort of way. I love that buildup that happens. And I used to be the head of people at Talkspace. So mental health is always near and dear to my heart, and really excited for this conversation.
Awesome. My name is Sheila Kruger. I'm formerly the Global Benefit Leader at Zoom, currently doing consulting in the HR vendor space with startups looking to bring their products to market with employers. And I am in the Phoenix area as well. Hey, Stephanie.
Wonderful. Well, welcome. And I can already tell this is going to be a great discussion. So we're going to dive right in. We're not going to waste any time. Nadia, I'm going to direct the first question to you. I'm more of a systems person. So as we think about what we can do to redesign work, to proactively create and sustain well-being, what are your thoughts on redesigning work? And we'll let you chime in, and then others please unmute and chime in as you would like. And then for those who are listening, please also share your thoughts on this question in the comments.
I love this question. Thanks so much. Because I think when we think about burnout or wellness, it turns into an individual responsibility where it's like, take more time off, do meditation, access whatever benefits might be available to you. But when we think of it, I love that you said systems thinking. I think of it as like an operational issue. That's why I like the idea of people ops, where it's like, how do we think of this at a system level, at a team level, and at the individual level? And how is this all working together? Because when it's an operational issue, then it's like, oh, do we have unclear shifting priorities? Is the target constantly moving? And that's creating a lot of urgency and emergency on teams where they're constantly on and don't have an opportunity to really understand where they're going, get that thing done, and do it in a really clean, clear way, right? Do they have lack of role? Is there like excessive workload? I think especially in the startup places that I'm in, managers aren't equipped to understand, like, how do I check in on capacity load? And I think sometimes we confuse caring about mental health with trying to be a therapist, but really there's so much that can be done at a system level to make sure that, are our processes designed well? Are they clear? Is there unspoken pressure in over delivering? And that comes from leadership and communication from the top, but that reinforcement in the middle. And then, as you said, those systems of how do we make sure that people are doing what they need to be doing and not having to scramble, in a chaotic mess.
Yeah, super true. I really love that. I think part of it is that we need to remember that, mental health isn't a fad. It's something that's always been around. It's always been an issue. It's just not been talked about a lot for a lot of years. And I'm so happy that it's finally something that's come up to the forefront, and it's something that we're talking about in the HR space. And I think it's even happening outside of that, which makes me very happy. I think planning our workspaces and looking at our culture and making sure that we're considering mental health as part of all of that, super important. I know I'm just about ready to say Stephanie's favorite words, psychological safety. um, building a workplace where people feel free to express themselves, discuss their concerns, work, in a safe environment. Excuse me, safe environment. All of those things are so important, and so it's pretty easy in the end to look at that list and say, oh yeah, we could do that, and it won't even cost us anything. It just is a mind shift a lot of the times. It's how are we doing business? Oh, well, if we did it this way, it won't cost us anything more or less, but we'll have better results.
Sheila did quote one of my favorite terms, psychological safety. So thank you for saying it before I had to. This is something that's really a hot button of mine. I'm so great. Nadia, you said it so beautifully. Like, let's talk about how we operationalize so many of these things. And honestly, most of what we end up talking about when it comes to integrating well-being and mental health supports in the workplace really do rely on individual action. Whether we're asking employees to take individual action, or are we asking HR leaders to take individual action, often without budget, or we're asking managers to take individual action. I mean, we had such large discourse, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, around, okay, now are we asking HR, are we asking frontline managers to become de facto therapists? It's really problematic. And managers, HR practitioners, those are employees as well. And so I'm a really big believer in how do we actually scaffold the individual action behaviors we need with those systems and processes that also can really directly address this. And this is why I have such a strong passion around trauma-informed practices. So trauma-informed workplace is the work that I do. It's actually founded in decades of research from specifically the recovery and healthcare space around the concept of trauma-informed care. And really what this does is it allows our individual actions and behaviors and also our systems and processes to be designed in a way to think about how individuals respond to traumatic experiences on the extreme end of what we may consider when it comes to mental health. But it also just creates the sense of self-efficacy and confidence because these are ingrained in the process, that it really helps bolster those aspects of a job that are really inherently very empowering.
Yeah, I can chime in to just support. I think everyone has already said this sort of, I really appreciate the shift to what can we do at an organizational level instead of just making it individual responsibility of the person. How can some of that responsibility be shared in how we organize work, how we design policy or process, how we, maybe declutter some of the tech fatigue that folks are experiencing that can negatively impact some of that mental health. So I think there are a lot of systemic ways at that operational level that do need to be addressed. And we're starting to kind of understand that better, which is super important. Yeah.
Well said. And I love that, Nadia, you highlighted this fact that when we talk about well-being and mental health, on so many occasions, our first reaction is to turn to the individual interventions and tell people to take a walk and go to a yoga class. But systemic problems require systemic solutions, right? And speaking of systems, Mandy, I'm going to come to you with this next question. As you think about your organization or even past organizations, how has the belief that wellness is a principle and not a perk shaped specific policies or cultural decisions in your organization?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I love it. We've been really fortunate as a new company to get to create from the ground up. So I've been in other places where it's a lot harder when you come in and you have to dismantle systems that are problematic. So it's been a very exciting journey the last 10 months as an organization to think very intentionally from the get-go about not designing wellness as sort of a way to reduce cost or increase productivity. I think that's been an old school thinking of wellness as a reaction to workplaces that are causing stress. And instead, how do we redesign workplaces to better support wellness and well-being? So we've been lucky that from day one, we started thinking about this super intentionally. If we want to be a people-centric consulting firm, a huge thing we saw with our consultants was burnout. A lot of people were coming from other organizations where they had been working 80, 90, 100-hour weeks. So we decided right away that we were a 4-day work week, Tuesday through Friday. It worked with our cadence in terms of client calls and expectations. And we were really clear about no emails, no Slack, no any communication norms on Monday, because that is sacred in a way, just like weekends are. And so I think you have to be clear about that around your communication norms. You have to model that way with leadership. We have an incredible CEO who models that. And that we've seen help a lot in just how we organize our work in a way that I think from day one was really intentional.
Sorry. We're like unmute at the same time. I keep I love what you said, Mandy. And for me, something that keeps coming up is I think we make mental health and well-being hard. I think we have this kind of barrier in our minds because it's such a big deal and it's such a serious topic. And in many ways, yes, it is a very serious topic. I don't want to value that, but it also is something that we're all dealing with all the time, always in every aspect of our life. It's kind of something inherent to our existence as human beings. And I actually think there's a lot of really good things, really great things that I know HR leaders are already doing in their organizations that really can, if we use it in the right way, if we're intentional about it, we can actually use this as a shift of how well-being is about that culture, that benefit. And I'll start with a question, maybe for our audience. Do you have an employee listening strategy or an employee listening mechanism in your organization? I'm guessing, yes, you do. And I just read this fantastic book. I have it right next to me. I didn't mean it, but I just read this fantastic book, Why Workplace Wellbeing Matters. It is very data heavy. It is by some Harvard researchers. It is fabulous, though. And it talks about employee listening. And it talks about the mechanism of getting that feedback and taking those actions, which if you're doing employee listening, I know you're already doing that anyway. That actually is a well-being mechanism. We're looking at that and expanding that, and we see that impact. And we talk about that around engagement and productivity and retention, but it also has significant impacts as it relates to mental health and well-being. So I think a little bit of this is, I'd recommend, if you really want to dig in on culture change around well-being and mental health in your organization, stop and consider what you're already doing well. That's maybe just recognizing the humanity of your workplace and then build from there. Build where you already have strength.
I 100% agree with that. I think one thing that I loved, Mandy, that you said that I think is such a key word in this discussion is intention. Like you were saying that you're intentionally building systems from the ground up. And I think that's where people trip up. And to Stephanie's point, it can feel so complex. And I would even push back, because although people have listening mechanisms, I think they really think of them in a one-dimensional way of maybe it's a survey once a year, it's complicated, and there's too much data, and then it takes you 3 months to look at it, and then everybody thinks it's stale, nobody pays attention to you, right? And really, listening is multi-modality. And I think we trip up because we think some data is more important than others, that some won't be as important, or something that can be actionable, but it really can be. And it could be the tiniest things, like how do we help people understand what a great one-on-one is? And it can be a 1-minute check-in in the beginning of, how was your weekend? What's going on? Anything I can do to support you? You know, just some really key, quick questions that can help people just get that data. And then those managers are feeding it to their managers and their managers, or going straight to their HRBP to help them be able to understand, oh, is there a trend going on? Is there something happening on this team or this individual? And I think that's where we get tripped up, is listening seems so complicated, and like we need to have 97% of people think this and 67% think that, and this is how we can move the needle in the organization and get the money behind something. But it doesn't have to be like that. To Stephanie's point, it can be just as easy as, here are 2 questions you always ask. Here are 3 things you can ask in team meetings to be able to bring that intentionality to these touch points, because we are humans humaning together, right? And I think one point I just wanted to share is one of my favorite coaches, executive coaches, Mark Levine, his phrase that I love saying is slow down to speed up. And I think that's the key with intentionality, where you need to slow down a little bit to be intentional, to be like, okay, how do we check in on people at the individual, at the team, at the company level? How does this make sense? Okay, go. And then get a little data, and then wayfind a bit to figure out, okay, we're going to shift here, shift there. And that's how we just make it a little bit more accessible, you know? But it's hard when you're just in this vortex of do, and you don't get to think a little bit about, like, wow, we're leaving people behind. There's burnout. We've already messed up, you know, because burnout is like stage 20. And there were so many other places that we could have heard and intervened in some sort of way.
I just want to say, Nadia, you're like spot on. Like, I don't know if you're secretly a Harvard researcher, but that's exactly what they said in this book. So, like, snaps to you. It actually points out 4 questions. 4 questions. Like, Harvard researchers say all you need is 4 questions for this. So again, that overcomplication, I think, is key. And to your point, we have to do more. No one told me to promote this book. I really do just think it's good. And I know a few people wanted to see the title, so I wanted to hold up again.
I think the other thing, Nadia, I love the part about, you know, more personal connections and talking at the beginning of meetings and those types of things. But I do think also, as you're building, you know, policies and procedures and things like that, you know, you really need to think about, you know, how many people do we have working on this job? Is it enough? Are we staffing appropriately? Are we, you know, do our leaders really have the training that they need to make sure that everybody's doing well, and able to deal with stuff? And are there people going to feel comfortable going to them if there's an issue, right? I think a lot of times, I know I always kind of felt like, gosh, it's great, we're providing this amazing mental health benefit, but on the other end of that stick, we are also having people working 60 hours a week, and we are on them all the time to get stuff done with less. That's the corporate buzzword right now, right? More with less. We're going to do more with less. And that just means we don't have enough people to do the work we need to get done. And everybody knows that. That's the code word. So it's just really important to get that policy and that ratio, those ratios and those kinds of things set up well, because, you know, don't break your arm patting yourself on the back for providing a great mental health program when you're causing the problem, right?
And I think that's so key, Sheila. There were so many things. I feel like we could probably spend the whole time on this one question, but that you said about do more with less. I've heard that so many times recently. And with AI, I think just increasing the speed of change and the velocity of what we're expected to do. And Nadia, to your point of like, we need to slow down. And I think we actually need to do less better, which is really tough for, I don't know, for CEOs and founders to often hear, right? Because the goal is to keep growing and scaling and doing more. But Stephanie, you hit on something earlier that I just want to reiterate, which is the like, listen to your people. Because I think at past places, what I've seen the biggest disconnect or detriment is like, we put out this wonderful mental health program that nobody needs because we're not actually listening or asking our workforce, what benefits do you need? And so there's this huge misalignment between what's offered and what's actually necessary.
Incredible insights. And I'm looking at the comments section here as well, and it is on fire. So please continue to share your thoughts. Hannah underlines this idea of intentionality and says we need to operationalize our intentions around the kind of workplaces we want to create. And Kimberly says, I spent decades learning stress management techniques on PTO and coming back to the reactive work environment and struggle to keep them alive. When teams make the pivot together, they see immediate and lasting benefits. So my next question, I'm going to come to Sheila for this one. As you think about kind of reassessing your strategy around mental health support, is there a recommended comprehensive strategy for considering your mental health support? And if you have a perspective on this, would love to hear your input on differentiating approaches or solutions between men and women, since data shows that men don't pursue or necessarily feel comfortable with one-on-one talk therapy as much as women.
Yep. It's a great question. I think initially having a comprehensive strategy, obviously you want to have something in place. You want to have an idea in mind before you press the red button. You need to know where you're going and why, and how that's going to fit within your business and your culture. I think it's really important that everybody understands that what strategy I have at my workplace may not be one that works in your workplace. We've got all different kinds of industries that are represented, I'm sure, in the audience today. And I could talk about everything we did at Zoom, and it would just totally not work for somebody who's in, manufacturing or something else. So, that's part of that strategy position, is thinking about, what are your goals? What are you trying to do? How do you want to do that? And then the communication piece, as with everything in HR, is the key issue, right? How do we get this message out to the people that need it? And how do we do the convincing for those who need it, but maybe are a little apprehensive about taking that next step? And so for me, a lot of that is, constant communication about what's available, bringing in the family. It's like not just, for most of us, if we have an EAP benefit or a mental health benefit, it's something that's available to the entire family. And the other thing is, if somebody at home knows that's available and realizes that their spouse is spiraling, they can make that recommendation as well. So it's not just coming from people at work. It's not, it's not just something they're thinking about. It's something that a spouse maybe says to them, hey, you know what? Remember, you have that place where you can call and talk to people. And so, my consistent example of that is sending out magnetic refrigerator magnets to all of our employees at their home address, with all of our mental health information on it. So they knew where to call, and every spouse had it. And of course the kids could see it and whatever, but that was there. And it could stay in one place and always be available as a resource. So I think that's important too. As far as the difference between, how men and women approach mental health, that is a really big nut to crack. And I think that very, very based in societal and cultural differences. Even I know in the different countries that we operated in Zoom, we saw varying degrees of participation based on gender. And, in the US, we were really to the point where we were at about 50-50. So I felt like we were doing, a pretty good job. And I think especially during COVID, everybody was like, yeah, I gotta do something because I can't do this for the rest of my life. So I think that was actually, in the end, maybe one of the silver linings of COVID was a lot more discussion about mental health. I think in other countries, the cultural piece, especially for men, is really difficult. And I had one vendor who I think gave me really great advice, which was, don't always talk about it like mental health. Just say, hey, if you need somebody to talk to, here's some people you can talk to. You don't have to talk about it being a counselor or a therapist or a this or that or the other. It's just like, there's some people here that are, trained to help you, and, just listen to your problems and maybe help you out. And so kind of removing that stigma, because I think that's always, a big piece of it. So that's kind of, strategy and differentiating, and just always consider all of your demographic.
And I think what you said around it's so small of like a magnet with all the resources in place that they could just stick on a fridge. And that's that concept of meeting people where they are, right? Trying to make things as accessible as possible. And I think that is part of there's lots of ways to reduce stigma, and it's modeling and this and that or whatever. But some of it is also just reducing the barrier to entry, where it's just a phone call, or them to even understand from an operational standpoint, when you call this number, it is confidential. We get none of that information, and it takes 2 seconds to get connected to somebody, and just reducing the barrier of ambiguity, and what will happen when this goes on. And I think making it accessible to the rest of the family is so key. And I know this topic is about beyond benefits, but I think beyond mental health benefits, like one of the number one reasons I think still for divorce is financial problems, and thinking about what are financial benefits that you're offering at your company. And when you offer, whether it's therapy or financial counseling or other things beyond that employee to the other people in their household, it's going to make that employee feel better, right? Like that a load is off from their family, that they're able to have a plan in place for whatever it might be that's impacting them. Because I know lots of people who they were at Talkspace from a mission-oriented place, sometimes from their own journeys, but a lot of the time it was because of the people that they loved around them that they had seen struggling. And what it looked like for us to be stepping up is not just saying, oh, hey, you get this free benefit, you get access to all this stuff. It's like, no. Also, the people who support you and enable you to even be able to take time and have a career and be at work. Those people also are part of your scaffolding and your support system. How are we ensuring that your support system is strong and has the resources they need?
I want to snap. Oh, sorry, Stephanie came off mute too.
Mandy, you go.
Okay.
Take
I
it.
was just like, yes, Nadia. I think the so many yeses. The reducing barriers to access can be simple, and just making things clear for folks to know where to go, how to get the information they need can be can be life-changing for folks. I also think I wouldn't say it's so much as a gender issue. I think there are stats that show gender, but I actually think it's like we know there are so many different dimensions of well-being and mental health. I think it comes back again to what does your workforce need? You said something around financial health, Nadia, and that's what we've seen. We have a lot of folks that are that sandwich generation, right? So they're caring for elderly parents and they're caring for young dependents. And for them, the biggest stressor right now is finances. And so providing some of that education is actually a huge boon to their health and well-being and their mental health. So again, think about your workforce. What do they need? Ask them, involve them, co-create together. I think that's the biggest thing I would say.
I'm so glad financial health, financial well-being, financial safety, whatever you want to call it, is coming up. Because first of all, let's just call a spade a spade. Let's talk about the reality of the environment we're in right now. And I am willing to put a lot of money on probably the number one mental health challenge right now in your workplace is around financial well-being, financial uncertainty. And I think this is one of those things where we say mental health and a lot of people think mental illness. They think about a diagnosable mental illness, depression, anxiety, OCD, and eating disorder. They think about those clinical diagnoses, which absolutely are encompassed in mental health. They're encompassed in mental health challenges, but they ignore the fact that we all have mental health. It's kind of like, I said this to my husband last night, and it's a little off color, but every time I hear someone say, oh, I don't need to talk about my mental health, I'm not crazy. It's the same as me hearing someone say, I don't need to care about what I eat, or if I work out, I'm not fat. Like it sounds jarring, because it is jarring when we think about the reality of mental health and how it impacts all of us. And so, yes, expand your thoughts, listen to your team on what's worrying them, what's keeping them up at night. And probably one of the number one things you're going to hear is finances, money. Another thing you might hear about is actual physical health and well-being. Any of us who have ever interacted with someone taking a leave of absence, FMLA, for whatever reason, know that this is an incredibly stressful and challenging period of time. Grief, loss. This is another thing that we know comes up in kind of the day-to-day of our work in organizations. This is an aspect of mental health that it becomes something that can kind of snowball and spiral. So I really strongly encourage, especially when we have these larger discussions about mental health and well-being, to shift our own understanding, shift our dialogue away from mental health is synonymous with mental illness. Mental health is this big, big picture that we are getting so much better at understanding, that relates to how our brain and our nervous system is working together for us. I do also really want to talk about the differences between men and women, because there's a handful of things here I get a little on my soapbox about here, especially because I do work a lot with men. I do a lot of work with the construction industry that's facing, very serious challenge as it relates to mental health crises around suicide and substance abuse and addiction. And absolutely, yes, there are some differences as we look at how men and women are socialized, how men and women react to different things. But there's also some real systemic barriers. When was the last time you met a Black male therapist? When was the last time you saw one? And when we pull back and look at real big systems issues for men, especially men of color, it is incredibly hard for them to find a therapist that looks like them and they feel they can relate to and build that connection. And so, obviously mental health is so much more than mental health treatment and therapy specifically. But when we look at the systemic issues, some of it is a little bit of a chicken or egg situation. Are men not responding to some of these resources because they're not really there for them in the same way? Listen, every other therapist I meet looks like me. Finding a therapist for me was relatively easy. And I think acknowledging some of the privilege inherent to the mental health system and some of those systemic challenges is super important when we have these discussions. I also want to dig in. I looked these statistics up because I was like, we're getting better. I'm bringing the statistics to this. But when we look at it, find it, my statistic here. 56% of adults with mental illness receive no treatment. So this is just not a man or woman issue. A vast majority of people who are experiencing a mental illness are not receiving treatment in the United States, and that's from Mental Health America. 27% of women received mental health treatment in the US in 2022. 16% of men received mental health treatment in 2022. And that's from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So we've got a difference. Sure, there's a difference, but it's not like 50%, a huge, massive change. I also want to point out how important it is that we keep working to reduce stigma around men's access to mental health resources, whether it's therapy, whether it's medication, whether it's programs, peer support, whether it is a cold plunge. I don't care how you help address your mental health. I care that you have access and are able to use those resources. Looking from today back to 2002, men's engagement with mental health resources has increased 88%. So it can feel like, especially for those of us who are working in heavily male dominated industries, it can feel like we're kind of, yelling at a brick wall. I feel it too sometimes, but the work matters and the work is making a difference. And so I really would encourage folks to kind of make sure we are rooting kind of some of our assumptions around men versus women, the intersection of all of our identities and mental health. We're rooting it in actual statistics, actual data, not just our own kind of preconceived notions, because we may be unintentionally kind of continuing some of those, stigmas, some of those things that may be shifting and may be changing. And I think all of us want to change. I got on the soapbox, sorry.
I'm looking at the comments here as well, and Janice and Evelyn loved the highlighting of the importance of the trauma-informed workplace, Stephanie. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation earlier as well. We have 5 minutes left. So let's make these last 5 minutes super impactful. We have not talked about an important stakeholder here yet, which is the manager. And we know from Gallup data that 70% of the variance in employee engagement can be attributed to the relationship with your direct manager, right? And so much of our mental health is impacted by our direct managers. So one of the questions that came through in the comments was, how do we deal with toxic leaders? They inflict a lot of trauma to the people they lead. Besides holding them accountable, how can we help them see their unacceptable behavior and want them to change? Stephanie, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I struggle with the term toxic leaders because there's so much that it can mean. There's so much that it can encompass. And something I try and think about whenever, this kind of conversation piece comes up. How can we deal with these challenging leaders, these toxic leaders? And my number one thing, I stole this quote and I don't know who to attribute to. I apologize. My number one thing I think about when it comes to this is, when we think about culture, we often think about, what we're listed on our company page, what we talk about, some of those great things that are happening. And someone said, instead, think of your culture as being defined by the worst behavior you're willing to accept. And I think shifting that and saying that and shifting that focus is so, so important. I cannot tell you how many toxic leaders I've worked with who have continued to have jobs, who have continued to do harm, who have harmed me directly because they helped make their company make money. And I think there's a real serious conversation that organizations and organizational leaders need to be willing to have with themselves to really get to, what are we about? And if we're about just making money and we're going to overlook some of those things, I guess, okay, be honest about that at least, instead of saying that this isn't an issue. But I think really holding to that idea of what behavior are we completely unwilling to accept, and that means everyone, I think is so important as we're defining our culture, updating our culture. There's so much more we can say, but just in the sake of time and wanting to hear from the other panelists, I'll kind of leave it there and say this is a huge additional conversation we could probably have a whole panel discussion on.
Yeah, I love that, Stephanie. I 100% agree. We've all heard the phrase, I'm sure, people don't leave companies, they leave leaders or managers or people, which is true, but the organization is the one cultivating, enabling, incentivizing, or condoning those behaviors from the leader. So there does have to be a responsibility at an organizational level to say, how are we equipping our managers with the skills, the tools they need to be good leaders of human beings, of hearts and brains, and, and how are we holding them accountable for that? Just the same way we would hold a VP accountable for budgeting, we need to make sure they are held accountable for psychological safety, for, not modeling detrimental behaviors that are tearing down the ability of others to succeed. So there has to be some responsibility from the organization. And that is a huge piece of that systemic operationalizing of wellness, is how are we coaching and training and holding our leaders accountable?
I think that's such a good point, because I think people confuse toxicity with like a personality trait. It's not a personality trait. It's a set of behaviors that someone is continuing to choose to do. And at a certain level, I think there might be some junior HR people on this call. I don't think that you're walking up to the CEO and laying out how they're impacting the organization negatively and they need to stop immediately, right? And I think it's a really complicated topic around how do we go at this? How do we look at our different levels of power and impact and influence? Who are our other stakeholders who are also seeing what we're seeing and feeling that, who are trying to protect their teams? I think we need to look at this. Again, it's multi-modality around how do we solve a problem. There's never one answer. And sometimes at the end of the day, it may not be a fit. It may be destructive. There may be huge retention problems that you can point to data and be like, wow, look at these behaviors. And it is hurting our bottom line in so many ways. But if people don't want to hear that, it may not be the right place for you or other people at that company. And I know that's hard to hear in this market.
I don't have a lot to add, but I do think, a couple things that we've brought up during this time that made me think of other things. And it's really part of the leadership thing too, is like thinking about, as we build policies, how are we structuring parental leave? How are we structuring bereavement? How are we teaching managers to deal with those things? And talk about those things, because my experience is managers are terrible at talking to a pregnant woman about her maternity leave. Like, they are just horrible at it. Half of them are scared to even say anything, and the ones that do usually say something stupid. So it's like, you gotta, there really needs to be something there to help these folks get through that, because it's going to happen. There's not any workplace that's not going to have those issues. So just super important to do that and make sure that those, I do think that helps when managers are looking at people, as people instead of as widgets. That helps to remove a huge layer of toxicity. So there you go.
Incredible insights. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your wisdom and your insights with us. Everyone in the comments for bringing your perspective to this conversation. Enjoy the rest of the summit. We'll see you soon for the next panel, which is resilience in high pressure work environment. Be well, everyone. Thank you.
everyone, and welcome to yet another conversation, part of day 3 of our Workplace Wellbeing and Mental Health Summit. I would love to welcome everyone who just joined us, or just thank you for rolling from the previous conversations. It's always a joy and a privilege having you with us. For the next 40 minutes or so, we will be talking about resilience in a high-pressure work environment. More specifically, how we can teach teams to thrive despite constant change and uncertainty. I will ask Jessa to help me bring the wonderful lineup of speakers on the stage. And while they get comfortable in their Zoom boxes, I will encourage everybody in the audience, keep doing what you've been doing today. Use the chat generously, and do let us know your own take on whatever it is that we are discussing with our panelists. So let's make the most out of the minutes we have today. Hacking HR minutes tend to feel shorter than regular minutes, and kick it off in style. I will pass the e-mic around clockwise as you are on my screen, and I will ask you to first shortly introduce yourselves, but also resilience tends to be one of those words that, everybody knows what it is. But if you ask people, what do you think it is? We all have our own takes and lenses into it. So what is your understanding of resilience that you bring into our conversation today? Christine, it's great to see you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so glad to be here. My name is Kristen Strunk, and I am a human resources professional with over, I hate to say it, a quarter of a century of experience in a bunch of different organizations. And when I think about resilience, I'm thinking about not only our ability to absorb and address changes that are happening around us, but also our ability to know when to rest, our ability to know when to disengage and be able to kind of fill ourselves up and come back to something. And so I think that would be part of the key definition of resilience.
Thank you so very much. Courtney, good to see you. Good to have you with us.
Hi, it's great to be here with everybody. My name is Courtney Shelton, and I am a Chief People Officer here in Toronto. When I think about resilience for me, I really think about the ability to bounce back, from setback, the ability to overcome adversity or failure as it's categorized. So when I think about resilience, it's that. But of course, as we'll get into the conversation, it's so layered. Your ability to bounce back is so layered in so many different things. But that's what resilience means to me.
Thank you so very much. And just a bit of a logistics ask for help. When you are not contributing, may I ask you to stay on mute, because otherwise technology is not behaving at its best. Thank you very, very much. Jen, good to see you. It's been a minute.
It has, Manolo. Thanks for having me back. And Courtney, I'm a fellow Canadian as well, though I am in the US now. So it's always good to see someone from my home and native land. I am thrilled to be back here on the Hacking HR sort of stage, if you will, because my view of resilience is that we're getting it all wrong. I think we treat it like a personality trait when it's actually a practice. And I have spent 30 years in leadership and HR roles, really listening, helping individuals and teams to build the skills and the practices that will help them to become more resilient. So I'm so excited for this discussion today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Rich, this conversation would not have been the same without you. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Manola. So my name is Rich Bertner. I've got about 30 years in total rewards across global and smaller sized organizations. When I think of resilience, I think kind of what Kristen was saying as well is, what are we thinking about of how we're going through some of these processes? I also see resilience, kind of what Courtney was talking about, of more of kind of a learning and growth opportunity as well. I think I've seen the words utilized. If learning and growth is through not pain, but unfortunately, I think there is pain in some of these processes that we go through, but a sense of uncomfortableness, doing things maybe that we haven't done before. And how do we, again, to Courtney's point, bounce back? So that's how I kind of think about resilience.
Thank you. Bridget, thank you for being with us today.
I'm very excited to be here. My name is Bridget Wilder. I serve in the role of Chief People and Culture Officer at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science. In terms of what resilience is, the first thing I think about is what it's not. Resilience is not instinctual. It is something that we intentionally develop through tools, trainings, and trust. It kind of reminded me when I was 17 and I was learning how to drive. My parents thought I could automatically drive because I watched them drive. And when I ran over that first curve, they all hollered, right? But you don't learn from observing. You learn from practicing, from doing, and also recognizing that when we have urgency, when we have chaos, that's not the enemy. It's how we respond to it. So that when you have a balance, I should say a flexible balance, because it's never 50-50, right? But it's understanding when you're in that moment to pause, then step back and examine what you need to do and then act.
I knew that there would be amazing conversation in this panel, and I was so looking forward to it. Before we dive even deeper into resilience, and I will definitely come back and collect on this practice of resilience, because I do believe that one of the ways in which we use resilience arguably is when we say, how do we build resilience in tough times? And back to your point, Bridget, that's when you exercise it. But let's park that, and I will come and collect it. One of the things that really caught my attention in the name of the panel is high pressure. And this can mean so many different things in so many different situations. And just a very, very short preamble to my next question. When I go about doing my change work in my daily job, one of the toughest conversations is, when is the crisis response become business as usual? And I think as organizations, we are extremely good at ramping up, but we are not equally intentional at creating a new baseline and looking at, okay, what is our new reality? And the pushback that I get most often is, yeah, but we're agile. Yet one of the key principles of agile is to design and allocate sustainable workloads, not feasible, not doable, but sustainable. I will end my blabathon here, and I will open the conversation to, what do we mean by high pressure work environment, and when high pressure is just motion over movement? And I always go diagonally. So Jen, you will be the pioneer for this one, and then everybody jump in and build your conversation.
I think you should coin the term blabathon. I have a lot of use cases for it. I love it. Okay, I love this topic, and I'm a mother of 3. So the first thing that comes to my mind is the high pressure situation in one of my workplaces, which is like the kitchen in the morning. And I think it really easily translates to the workplace. There's multiple stakeholders, if you will. There's a deadline, there's time frames, there's certainly varied sets of expectations. Inevitably, there's stuff that comes up at the last minute, the permission slip. I mean, you name it. I have three kids. And so when I think about high pressure, it's all of that. It's the unpredictable, it's the individualization, and it's that sort of collective energy that happens. And I think the big misnomer here is that resilience is built in those high pressure situations. My view is resilience is built in the pause between the high pressure situations. In the moment, it's survival. Nobody's learning anything. And so I think this idea that we're agile, this chaos and this normalization, that especially in the tech industry, where I spend a lot of time with my clients, that it's like, this is how we get good. This is how we build resilient teams. I think what it's doing is just burning people out. So my view is that we have to start by taking a step back and looking at this view that chaos is agility and chaos is resilience. I do not think that's the case, and we should start to focus on the spaces in between and creating the spaces in between those high pressure sort of situations that are inevitably, deadline driven and things like that. I'd love to hear from the rest of the group.
I can jump in. The very first thing that came to my mind was, when you see the job descriptions and they're like, will you thrive in this fast-paced environment or this agile environment or whatever it's going to say? I'm like, if I see another fast-paced environment, you are only fast-paced because you're disorganized, you don't have the right processes in place. Like, that's not something that we should be shouting from the rooftops, that like, can you really thrive in this fast-paced environment? It's like most organizations shouldn't even be that fast-paced. They could be very proportionately paced if you just have the right pieces and the right people in place. So when I think about this high pressure environment, and I echo so much of what you're saying, Jen, where it's like people think that's where resilience is built. It's not built there. That's actually where I don't want to use the word like trauma, or I don't want to misplace the word trauma in a workplace. I know trauma can happen in a workplace, but I think it's like, I actually think that does a lot of harm because they don't actually learn how to bounce back, because there's no space to bounce back. When every single day is like fast paced, high pressure, high pressure, high pressure, you don't get that respite to actually build the resilience in the off times, where if you have these sort of cyclical motions where you can learn from failure, then apply it to the next time, like that is a part of how resilience is built. But if it's just high pressure, fast paced for no reason, 365, then there's no real resilience to be built. It's just chaos. It's just chaos permanently, and you just sit in sort of that failure in that space, and you don't really get the opportunity to really be truly resilient.
I think, Courtney, one of the things that you were mentioning that resonates with me is it just feels like there's a lack of intentional planning that creates this chaos. And we see it, right? We see it all the time. I also use this, your emergency does not constitute my sense of urgency, right? And in that respect, to your point, where are we going to learn? And some of the things that I've seen with teams that I've been with is, getting ready, being very mindful, being very intentional, creating that space of opportunity to, have failure in terms of innovation at the end of the day, so that you can learn from that and take that into kind of the next evolution, so that when you are kind of getting into kind of like in Finding Nemo, right? The turtles jump into the stream of the sea and it's fast paced, hopefully kind of creating that mindset I'm trying to think of the word of, your training of your mind, so that when you get into that situation, again, at the end of the day, it's helpful. But again, the lack of planning for me is just, that's what's, I think we're all seeing right now, is just creating a lot of this messiness that we all experience.
Bridget, I saw you unmuted earlier.
Yeah, I think really high pressure is subjective to the environment, right? I've worked in call centers, and that's constant, everyday high pressure. And then I've worked in colleges, and high pressure is when something major happens that we didn't expect, like COVID, because you're not expecting to work remote because you're used to working in person. So I think it's really important that we recognize that we have to look at our teams, we have to look at our organization, and in those times of high pressure, figure out where you see your pressure points and develop tools and resources and safe spaces for your team to be able to adapt. Because as you had mentioned earlier, it's about having a baseline, because it is so objective of what high pressure means. But when you have to be in that middle and everybody's in the mess of it and the urgency of it, what tools have you trained people throughout the normal times so when it happens, like a fire drill or earthquake drill, or when you're on the plane and they show you how to use the tools, you do it before it happens, so that when the chaos happens, it impacts them, but it levels out.
Kristen.
So I would say that all of this is extremely critical, and that resilience is built in those pauses, right? But not being allowed to plan for or reflect on this concept of high pressure. Like, we're talking about it like it should happen in a specific moment, and it should be for a specific period of time, right? And you should be able to be transparent with your organization about why it's happening. It's either a crisis or a deadline or a client issue or whatever the case might be. And you have to be able to be very transparent with your team to say, this is why this is happening. This is the goal of what we're trying to accomplish. This is the estimated time that it's going to last. Now we go. But you're right. When it is constant motion, it's not high pressure. It's low organization, low prioritization. Everything can't be a priority if everything is a priority. And the same is true for high pressure. You can't be putting out a fire when everything is on fire.
I love this, and I look at the comments, and of course, slow is smooth, smooth is fast popped up. I was curious and counting how long it will take, and I do want to go one layer deeper into this conversation that we are creating, because a lot of this resilience in tough times, I think it's also a side effect of what we see in movies, and a lot of the parallels between the business world and the military world. VUCA in itself being a term that comes from the army strategists, right? And yet what happens between the moments when there's tension and bullets are flying, I guess those moments don't have as much cinematic value as the high pressure moments. So we don't see the inspiration from those. Now, Rich, I would ask you to lead us into the next slice, and how can we reposition the conversation around what resilience is and what a high pressure environment is as an HR professional in an environment where there's a high, borrowing from movies again, a need for speed. How do we do this?
I think honestly, being very intentional. For those that know me, I'm a very straight individual. And straight in terms of being very direct, right? And how I've kind of looked at that is, again, when we talked about high pressure versus resilience, high pressure is, again, an impact or an effect of the fact that we're not being very intentional and we're not being very mindful. Everything, it's like the new shiny toy. Hey, we want to look at this. We want to do this. We want to do that. I think it's again, being intentional in those conversations to say, look, at the end of the day, we can do this within the confines of what we have. Stretching a little bit looks like this at the end of the day. But it's, again, having that intentionality in the conversations to make sure that, again, leaders understand, again, I hate to use it. It is your emergency is not my sense of urgency, in a nice way, of course, right? Because you don't want to kind of, bite the hand that feeds you in terms of the leadership. But those are the things that I see is we have to be very intentional, because, again, high pressure is, again, I see a lack of planning, a lack of thoughtfulness. Whereas resilience is, how are we, again, as Bridget mentioned, how are we training ourselves? How are we learning from those opportunities? Can we create that safe space for our teams at the end of the day to learn from those situations and be prepared before we go into it, not just continually subjecting ourselves to, again, kind of the firing line, right, from leadership at the end of the day.
Rich, I'd love to build on that. I have a dream speech. It would be that we redefine ROI to be return on intention. And so I love that you're bringing up intention, because I think it just underscores everything. And I focus a lot on just really practical solutions. I really kind of loathe theory and sort of platitudes. So when I think about what role does HR actually play in sort of turning the ship here, I have a couple of specific sort of thoughts. One is I'm not a process person, and yet I believe we have to build in some intentional processes that put reflection and pause into the process. So when a deadline ends and the next project kicks off, fail, right? So building into whatever project management, whatever your business leaders are working with. And I think that as HR, we often have that sort of seat next to the plans that are happening. And I think we can insert ourselves up there and bring that sort of, hey, let's talk about this timeline. How realistic is this? Not from like a deliverable, sort of rollout standpoint, but from your human resources piece of it, the people and what do they need in between there. So I think there's a place for HR to get better at pushing for intention and rest and reflection into a process. I think internal communications, which is often either within or tangential to HR, is critical. There's nothing that makes me crazier than seeing a town hall where it's all about the successful launch. I think equal airtime for the struggles, the setbacks, the things that we've tried and we've failed is everything, because when we only promote the people, I mean, how often do you see this? We give the shining award, the quarter employee of the quarter, to the person who ran through the fire and worked the weekends. Well, whether we're saying it or not, what we're saying to people is that's what it takes. Like, just run yourself ragged and then we'll give you the award. So we need to be sharing the stories about the other side as well. And I think the third thing, modeling the way is so hard, because so often it's the leaders who are struggling the most. So then you put that added pressure of, now you need to be the model. And they're a mess themselves. However, I do think it's incumbent, especially upon people, leaders, to normalize, meaning block out time in your calendar for reflection, put that therapy appointment on the calendar, talk about the things that you're struggling with when you have the mic at the team meeting or the all hands sort of thing. So I think it happens in those little ways, those subtle and not so subtle messages, where leaders can come out and show like, hey, yeah, I'm struggling with this too, or I need a day for for myself to be able to rest as well. So I think HR can make a real difference by taking it out of the let's build a resilient organization and forcing the conversation to say, what are the practices and the disciplines and the expectations that are actually going to cause that result?
Yeah, and Jen, just to really kind of further that conversation, as HR, we have the ability, because we potentially see not only this particular project over here, but we also know what might be going on over here. And as the hub of this, a lot of our responsibility is around alerting the organization to all of the things that are happening, right? And so if you're working in silos and we don't have any of that cross communication, that's a really big red flag, and it doesn't build resilience, it builds panic in people. But the other thing that we do need to talk about is this idea of change fatigue. And we need to be able to have the conversation around, it's not just these huge, big, incremental, quote unquote, high pressure changes that are impacting our teams and our employees. It is really kind of the small, minute things that are changing that are constant, right? We're constantly being bombarded with changes and new situations and new environment and fewer resources. And being able to measure change fatigue in the organization can also help the organization make really smart decisions about when to apply pressure to a specific team or when not to apply that pressure.
I'll just piggyback off of that, and it reminds me of another panel that I was speaking at for Hacking HR, where I was talking about pro-sci or change, it doesn't have to be pro-sci, but or change management strategies. And if I'm even reflecting on my own experience, I'm somebody that I really like to have really high output. I really like to deliver a lot. And when I went through this program and reflected on the pressure that I had by accident put on my entire team, also on my colleagues, because I was so passionate about the project and I wanted it to get done. I didn't follow any of the normal things within change management. Only after I took that course was I like, oh man, oh man. I didn't even begin to scratch the surface of how a change should actually be felt, how we should model that change, what we should look like as we're going through that change. So I think when I reflect on how HR people and how leaders can also help to bring that to their organization, I think it doesn't always have to be like a certification or a program, but really bringing in the components of like true change management, because that's all baked in there. Reflection is baked in, testing the waters is baked in. When we follow the framework of true change management, it really does help for all change. Because I don't know if it was Kristen or Jen, but one of you guys mentioned that all change, even small change, is strenuous, right? And that was something that I was really guilty of too, where, okay, so I didn't change a whole 12-month project. I was just doing a 1-month project, or I was just doing 2 weeks, but I was burning out my entire team because every change was 2 weeks plus my big 12-month change. So I think that that's a big piece of it as well.
Adding to that, my colleagues have just really touched on all the key points. I just think really when we talk about change and the impact that it has on others, we have to always get leadership and employees to think, what's your why? Why do we want to do this? And does it tie back to why we say we exist, right? Because it could be nice to do. In HR, we're known for being nice. We overeat that sandwich about tell something good, then tell something bad, then tell something good. No, we ought to decide to go from nice to being kind. We understand what you want, but let's also talk about the pros and cons of what your options are for you to achieve your why. And so we have to have that balance between nice and kind. But we got to many times be kind when we're talking about change, to get them to have a reality check. What's the why? And then how is it going to impact the people that have to implement it, or be the impact of what it has?
Just wanted to add one thought to what my peers are saying here is, when we're going through change, we as HR have to model the behavior that we want leaders outside of HR. And candidly, HR is one of the biggest violators of all of this, right? We preach to our businesses and our stakeholders to do, but then we don't model that same behavior within HR or even within our teams. So if we want the culture to change, we have to lead by example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just add to that. I saw a comment pop up, that question, if the leader is supposed to lead, or in this case, if HR is supposed to lead, well, then who supports them? And I think all of us would probably align around HR. For HR is so non-existent. And so, I think about, this will feel self-promotional because I am a coach, but I think engaging specific outside resources from people who understand the HR world, who can support your HR team, can be invaluable, which is different than a business consultant coming in and telling you how to do it. So get your HR people involved in HR networks, get them connected to other people, safe spaces, coaches, therapy, whatever it is that they need. HR is such a heavy job. And then again, layering on an expectation that we need to hold it all together and lead the way. We also, we can't fill, from an empty cup. And so I think HR for HR should be on the top of every HR leader's agenda.
Mm. Well, I need to jump in because you mentioned change, and I will bring in a quote that almost without exception, I use it as the opening insight for the change conversations I facilitate at work. And that quote comes from one of the boxers that are oftentimes quoted, Muhammad Ali. And he said that it's not the mountains ahead you need to climb that wears you out. It's the pebble in your shoe. So we tend to focus on the mountains, but how do we address the pebbles in the shoe? One thing that does concern me when I come across it, and it happens quite often, when I run some sort of exercises based on liberating structures, and there's individual reflection, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and people cannot sit in individual reflection for 3 minutes. And it almost feels like the more senior, the more challenged they are by this space. And I have seen people, checking emails, responding to emails, writing groceries lists. So they would do anything just to get as many things done as possible. And if you will indulge me just 1 minute for a story, and this goes probably in your toolbox if you want to use it. A few years back, I was working with a team on productivity and effectiveness. And it was a 2-day workshop. I asked them at the end of the first day, what's the mental image for productivity? And almost everyone said a flight of stairs that you just go up and up and up and up and up. So I came back home. I started researching why different stairs look differently. So about 4 a.m., I was reading architecture and construction websites, and there are 3 reasons why we have landings. 1, to rest. 2nd, to be able to change direction. You cannot change the direction of a staircase without a landing. And the 3rd one is to be able to safely open a door onto the staircase. So I built a visual around that. And whenever we talk about change and change plans, back to Courtney's point, I ask people, how do you look for landings? How do you make sure that you rest? How do you make sure that you look whether you need to change direction? And how do you allow for new into your project? Now, if you were to give everybody in the audience a recommendation or an advice to trigger meaningful conversations around resilience around them, do you have a signature question? Do you have a point that you drive across and you saw it particularly impactful? And Bridget, I would invite you to go first.
I don't have a signature question. I call myself a people detective, and I have a little story behind that, because my job is not only to listen to people, to hear what people say, but to listen what they don't say, right? Because once I pay attention to what they don't say, I understand their why, then I can ask the right question. So if I understand your why, then I can ask, is what you're about to do or what you're thinking about to do going to help you to achieve that why? If you're going to achieve that why, or it's going to give you that sense of satisfaction, and what does that look like? When it comes to leadership, again, I want to know what's their why. Maybe they got to save dollars. Maybe they got to do some restructuring. If I understand your why, that creates that magic question for you.
I will just add on that I know probably everybody listening to, and certainly everybody on this panel, there's a trickiness to recruiting people who are resilient. Like it's how do you ascertain in an interview if you wanna bring in people who are already resilient, how do you do that? And so I don't have like a signature question, but it did just cause me pause building off of Bridget. It's sort of like, when I'm meeting with people and I'm trying to ascertain what their level of resilience is, I think it comes from a place of discussion around failure, like an openness to discuss failure, an openness to discuss adversity, and not in like a deeply personal way if they don't want to, of course. But even from a recruiting perspective, talking about what's the biggest failure that you've had? What does that look like to you? What does a big failure look like to you? And you're able to ascertain a lot about their level of resilience from that. And when I think about my teams or trying to foster that and have that on my teams, I forget who, but somebody had an amazing point around openly talking about with your teams, you know what, I'm feeling kind of burnt out today, and not in a way that unloads onto them, but in a way that shares the humanness of like, I feel the strain sometimes too. Here's what I'm going to do. I think an important piece is the next step. I'm feeling really burnt out today. So you know what, I'm going to go take a walk. You should go take a walk. It's really beautiful outside. And even small things like that help to build this openness to, well, if Courtney did it, then that means I can do it too. If Courtney feels strained sometimes and then she has an action, I can go do that too.
I think I love the why, and then, you know, having people reflect on past failures. I think pattern recognition is a critical unlock for everyone in our own getting in touch with our own level of resilience, as well as seeing that in others. And that goes both ways. It's what are your failures and how do you speak of them? How do you contextualize them? But also, what are your successes? I like to say to people, I mean, we're all here. We have 100% track record of getting through some tough stuff. So just inherently, it's like going back and saying, what are those things that I did? Maybe they weren't even a failure. Maybe they were a success. What can I draw on from there? What are those sort of superpowers that I have that I may not associate with resilience? Because again, we often think resilience is just overcoming failure. And I don't believe that to be the case. But I love this question because I was also struggling with it, because again, it can seem like this huge concept. Let's be resilient. Let's build resilience teams. So I also sort of went on a quest to like, how can we figure it out? How can we measure it? How do we even know what our level is? So I actually just completed a certification to become a certified resilience coach. And there's an assessment, which is called the PR6. And it takes a holistic view to actually measuring your level of resilience. So it's collaboration, vision, composure, reasoning, tenacity, and health. And I think the opportunity to be able to talk about all 6 of those different areas, and even having a foundation of talking about someone's health, physical, mental, and emotional health as well in the workplace, that really underpins everything else. So I do think that one of the wins right now is that resilience is being talked about. You know, it's on the list. It's getting, you know, I mean, look at us, right? Here we are on this panel. And I think that that now it's incumbent upon us to not stop at the concepts, but instead try to really define what it is, recognize that it's inherently so individual. And if we can start with you know, measuring and taking care of the individual, then we will see those collective results as well.
I think one of the things that that I continue to hear is one, the word failure, right? Personally, I don't like that word. So when I'm talking with my teams, we're talking about successes, but also learning opportunities, and that's kind of the equivalent for a failure. And I think, Courtney, what you said is, and I love it as well, is sitting down with the team kind of after we've had a conversation or after we've had a presentation that maybe didn't go so well. What did we learn from that? And it's not just in terms of tell me about your failures, but it's also, how did you take that failure? What did you do with that next at the end of the day? And that's where I kind of see resilience, because some of the examples I've used with my team is, hey, I presented this, time wasn't right. It could have been culturally, it could have been financially, it could have been other things going on in the firm, but not losing sight of it, continuing to kind of push that forward. And that's where we were kind of talking about, how do we create that environment, that innovation, that resilience for our teams in a safe space, so that when they do go out and they do have those opportunities, we've prepared them as much as possible, but also talking about what didn't go as well and how can we use that and turn that around again in terms of a learning opportunity.
So I think what I love about this particular conversation is that what we're hearing is a mix of the necessary responsibility of the individual, right? And at some point, we as individuals have a responsibility to watch out for our self-care, to put ourselves in environments where we feel safe saying this is a boundary, or this is the time I need to recover, or this is space that I need. And the other piece that I really like about this conversation is that we are also bringing in those organizational factors to say the organization has to recognize, and we have to call out those spaces in between. And so when I think about resilience, and I think about the resilient organization or the agile organization or whatever adjective you want to throw in front of it, it really is not about creating the chaos as a whole. It's about creating those moments of calm in the chaos for that personal reflection, that group reflection, that what do we want to be different the next time we're faced with a challenge like this, that conversation around what do I want to do differently the next time I'm sitting in a situation like this, and making sure that as individuals we have the ability or the strength to potentially put ourselves in environments where we get to kind of go up to that resilience line, then back up, and then the next time we can go a little further, and then we have time to back up. And so that mix of conversation around individual and organizational, I think, is really the key to addressing resilience and building that as an organization and as an individual.
It's extremely painful to say that we are about 2 minutes away from saying goodbye. I think this is our Dr. Seuss moment with how did it get so late so soon, right? But I do believe that a few years ago, Archbishop Desmond Tutu was preparing for our panel today, because he said at some point that we need to stop taking people out of the river. We need to go upstream and see why they are falling in. And that speaks to everything that we covered today. I would really love to have a final wrap-up round, a punchline mic drop round. Otherwise, no pressure. We will go counterclockwise from how we started. And just, a short sentence or a word that is very loud on your mind as we are wrapping up our conversation today. Bridget, thank you, and you lead us in this.
I listen to motivational videos and quotes every day, and one of the things that stands out in my mind is that we build resilience not through the goals that we've met. We meet resilience through the things we learn from the goals we didn't meet. All right. And those are the things that I think people have to remember. They got to stay connected. They got to be connected to each other, to people and purpose. And when you have that, you have resilience.
Thank you so very much. Rich.
Yeah, I was just looking up a quote that I saw a couple of months ago when we talk about resilience. And again, this can apply maybe for a lot of people. It says, if your path is difficult, it is because your purpose is bigger than you thought. So keeping that in mind, right, is that what we're going through may seem difficult at the time, but at the end of the day, there is a bigger purpose for each of us at the end of the day.
Thank you. Jen.
I know I'm in the right crowd when there's quote after quote after quote that I'm trying to write down. So thank you all for your wisdom. I'll end where I started, which is try to shift from thinking of resilience as a personality trait to resilience as a practice. And the good news in that is it's not something that you have or you do not have, or that person has or they were born with. It's something we can all build and all access. And so I just think that mental shift of not having it be something out there can really make a difference in starting to say, what's a new action that I can take to make myself more resilient for the tough times that inevitably we're all going to go through.
Thank you. Courtney.
Yeah, not to add another quote into the mix, but I do feel like this one, even before this panel, I have often referenced the quote of, courage doesn't always roar. Courage is the ability to try again tomorrow, or to try to pick yourself up and try again tomorrow. And when I think about my teams, or I think about the teams that I work closely with, it's like, it happens in the small, and it happens in, there was a setback yesterday, let's try it again. And when I think about resilience, that's the first thing that jumps out at me is trying again tomorrow after a setback is really where it's all at for me.
Thank you. Kristen.
Yeah, and just to kind of culminate all of that, resilience is what blooms in the calm.
Thank you so very much. I feel called to wrap it up with undying wisdom from Mike Tyson. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I hope everybody in the audience, next time when you have a request, just put them through a resilience workshop, that you will send the recording of this conversation to whomever made that request, and look maybe into some alternatives or enhancers around that resilience workshop. Thank you, everybody. Please stay on. You have an amazing treat next, a panel on the inclusion of mental health in DEI initiatives. But Christine, Courtney, Jen, Rich, Bridget, thank you. And also thank you, Jessa, and all the Hacking HR team who take care of us time and time again. Thank you.
hello, friends. Welcome, 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 welcome. I am Frank. I'm your moderator today. I am a people and culture executive. 20 years of cross-industry experiences around talent development, inclusive initiatives, and most importantly, around people and what's important to them. Welcome, everybody. I want to take a moment and just say thank you, Hacking HR, for such a wonderful virtual summit. Want to thank the audience. I was looking at the chat right now. It is tough to follow Manola. She is a great conversationalist and steward of our ideas and our impacts. But I want to thank you all as the audience for taking the time for yourself as the true champions and carrying some of these actions and these ideas and platforms forward, whether personally or professionally. But as we welcome our panelists and get settled into our virtual boxes, I want to just do a recap. It's been a wonderful summit. I mean, day one, a lot of awareness, actionable support, dialogue, importance around site safety, identifying burnout and leadership role. Yesterday was just as jam-packed. Every day has been amazing around, hopefully you all have taken a lot of notes. I know I have, around well-being, future of work, health strategies, that connection around mind and body, and obviously around measuring. And we're going to expand on that a little bit during our conversation as well. Today is no different. You have long-term support. So not just today, tomorrow, but the long-term, embedding mental health into our core strategies and business, because it absolutely is a business initiative when we talk about people. So happy to be joined by our amazing panelists today, and just want to again welcome you all and thank you all for being here. Can't say that enough. So with that said, I've said enough, but I want to hear, and I know the audience wants to hear from our panel today. And I'd love to do kind of like what Manola does. I'm going to borrow one of the things she does. Let's do a virtual clockwise, what we see on our screen. So today that would start with you, my friend. Tell us a little bit about brief intro, but more specifically though, too, why you said yes to this subject around prioritizing well-being and mental health, especially across diverse workforces.
Sure. Thanks, Frank. My name is Sudhir Singh. I'm joining in from San Francisco Bay Area. I'm a people and culture executive with over 20 years of experience. Originally, I'm an engineer, so I moved from manufacturing, cutting metal on the shop floor, to HR 20 years ago. I am also the founder CEO for ProOgs, which is a firm focused on building culture in line with business strategy. I'm also co-founder for Inner Leap, which is a mental health initiative. I'm also the president of National Human Resources Association for Silicon Valley. So in all my roles, mental health plays a very, very important role. And I am super passionate about this aspect of human life and the corporate world now. And that is what made me say yes to this panel.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you, Sudhir. Alinda? I don't know if it's just me, but Alinda, I don't think we're able to hear you just now. We'll circle right back. Lauren.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. So yes, I am Lorraine Rajuezo. I am the only workforce DE&I psychologist in the United States. Yeah, I know, right? Crazy as it is. And if you know the United States political landscape right now, you know why I'm the only one. That being said, I was really excited about joining this in part because we need to stop thinking that our workforce needs to become more diversified. We are diversified. And mental health is part of that diversification. And if you really want to take care of your employees, if you want them to thrive in your workplace, this is one of those levers that we need to be pulling and addressing with all of our employees. So that's why I'm here today.
Bam, okay. I'll do a little virtual applause in. I know. Sudhir all over the place. And Lauren, okay, Dr. Lauren, one and only. Like it, love it. Emma.
Great, thank you. Thrilled to be here today. I've experienced both, starting off similar to Sudhir, where I started off in an industry completely different from people and culture and DEI work, but I've been fortunate enough to focus in on DEI over the past couple of years. And I've been even more fortunate to work for an organization that prioritized mental health in the workplace, and I've seen the benefits directly. I've seen how when you really embed mental health into your DEI strategy, those conversations just become more inclusive, you have more belonging, you have stronger connections, and ultimately it really does benefit the entire organization. So I love this topic because I have seen the positive impacts firsthand, and I really want to advocate for it across the board.
Okay, Emma. Okay, I think a little ketchup bottle. Anybody likes condiments on their plates if you're having dinner, lunch, breakfast, whatever time it is in your part of the world. All right, Emma. Thank you. Welcome, Liz.
Hello, can you hear me? Nice to see you all. I'm suddenly very conscious of my British accent on this call. So I am over in the UK in Manchester. I head up the internal communications and engagement team at ANS Group. We're a technology business, do lots of stuff in kind of digital transformation, cloud infrastructure, moving into the AI space. So all really exciting. And I think the impact of tech on mental health is a whole conversation in itself. We've not got a kind of dedicated D&I roles at ANS, and I'm lucky enough that my role, it brings in a lot of that work. But we also were very lucky in that we have lots of really active community groups led by our people. And one of our core values is be you. We have lots of groups kind of representing different identities at ANS. And I think as soon as you talk about identity and diversity and inclusion, that identity kind of is mental health that's so intertwined. So your identity, we're going to get onto intersectionality later, but I think your identity is so closely linked to your mental health. And I think in order for us to kind of perform and be happy and be the best partner to our customers and to thrive is for us to be comfortable talking about mental health. And certainly in the UK, we've still got a lot of work to do in that respect. We've come on so far in the last couple of years, but yeah, we've got a lot to do. So I'm here for the learning and the education, as well as sharing what we've done that's been helpful for our team.
Welcome and welcome us. I'll give you what we call an alligator chop. This is a little alligator, just a little clap like that. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
And people, please, those that are dialing in, show some affirmations and comments. Use the emojis. Go emoji. Happy. Make yourself happy with emojis. A lot of hearts and things. Affirmations for yourself and for our panelists. Alinda, I haven't forgot about you, my friend. I'm gonna come back to you. Hopefully, our technology, it's nothing's gonna hold us apart, my friend. Still no. Perhaps probably dialing out and then
anything now.
Oh yes, there we go. Positivity,
Okay.
love it.
It's just a matter of pressing the right buttons.
Bring it, Alinda. we want bring it.
Well, thank you for your patience. I appreciate you. I'm glad to be here this morning. My name is Alinda Durr, and my pronouns are she and her. I currently lead the inclusion and connection strategies work at US Cellular. And I am so very proud of the work that we've done there, just basically because we really do see our people as our primary asset, and the ways that we care for the communities and the customers and our associates just really makes what I do a dream job. So I've been in this space for, oh goodness, almost 30 years, but don't tell anyone that. I don't want to give anything away here. And I've seen organizations who have really worked hard at trying to bring inclusion into the workplace, but have failed for the purposes of it having been a check the box exercise, or something that they see other people doing and they're not making decisions that's based on data or anything that's really engaged with their people. So when you start talking about mental health, there's no way for you to leave your mental health behind when you come into the workplace. And every single one of us need to make sure that we're bringing our best to the workplace if we really do want to be a contributor of positive outcomes and innovation and productivity. So the reason I said yes to be here today, quite honestly, is because with the landscape that we're dealing with around DE&I in the United States right now, it's really scary how a lot of what we've become accustomed to doing has become stigmatized and polarized. So I believe it's important to have these conversations, not just within ourselves and, talking to other practitioners, but also speaking within our organizations, destigmatizing and even prioritizing the importance of mental health, because each and every last one of your employees need to know that they are being cared for in the way that they need. So equity is the reason why I said yes.
Bam, okay, another virtual round of applause.
See, that's why I need my mic to work.
Okay, yeah, that's all it took. You were ramping up. We were getting primed up, building off of each other. I love it. Don't worry. And the chat is blowing up. I see you all on there. I'm going to shout out a couple of folks in just a moment. And I think I want to pull on something you mentioned around the stigma, the stigmas around. And we talk about, data, all these other things, and not just organizations. I think so often I think we hear from our own personal lives as we bring ourselves to work, and you can't turn those things off. You reduce a bit, but you don't turn them off. And as you bring those things in culturally from our formative years and just from our friends and family and those that we care about, that's also a stigma. And so I'd love to, unpack, and I'm going to start with you, Emma, but I have a kind of a two-part question. When we talk about organizations, how can we intentionally integrate, mental health and well-being programs, but at the same time still help employees, our fellow employees, feel safe to do so? And then I'd love to hear from others to build upon that.
Sure, absolutely. I love this question. Thanks, Frank. So I'm going to start with the second part first, actually. And safety is a really big deal when it comes to mental health, when it comes to DEI initiatives in general. And it's not an easy thing to accomplish at an organization. It really has to be embedded into part of the culture. I think if I wanted to narrow it down for the sake of time and this panel, setting some expectations around what that looks like. Really providing people with a clear understanding of what it means to create a safe space around the topic of mental health and DEI, equipping them with the tools, right? Language and understanding so that they can engage in a meaningful way where they feel empowered to get involved. That really is an important part of the process also. So I think there's a few things that lend itself to safety, but those would be the two I would highlight. And then when we think about ways in which to incorporate mental health into broader DEI strategies, I would go to the thought process of bringing in a multifaceted approach, right? So we can think about mental health as a dimension of our diversity in and of itself, as it's been mentioned by the other panelists. It is a part of who we are. It's something that we bring to the table when we show up at work. It's also something that we have the ability to I'll say control in an intentional way, right? Because the workplace also impacts our employees' mental health. So we need to think about what we're doing every day that's having an impact on the mental health of our employees, as well as what mental health, experiences our employees are bringing to the workplace as well. So I really think having that dynamic is a really important way to take a holistic approach to this work.
Ooh, that was awesome, Emma. And yeah, I totally agree. About creating that safe environment and giving them the language. I think it's also a question of a lot of education in terms of prioritization, right? So how we prioritize things, typically our financial wellness sits right at the top, right? And then followed by social wellness, and then possibly physical, and then mental and spiritual. So I think helping people reprioritize through education is important. And I think organizations need to invest in that. So it's not about just, taking care of mental health through providing solutions, but it's also making them more aware. The other thing that education must include is that the definition of normal when it comes to mental health is different across different diverse groups, right? So what might sound normal to me as a man of color at a certain age might not be normal for a millennial, right? So it's very important to do that. Also help people identify through education what are the stigmas in their diverse groups, right? And last but not the least is the access part, right? Educating them on access, right? How can they access more education? How can they access solutions and treatments and so on? In addition to, of course, if possible, financially supporting them on that.
Love that. Love that. Love that. I'm going to tag on here to both of you, and I'm going to be a little bit more of a disruptor. Let's do it. Right. So I think one of the first elements of mental health that we need to recognize is, or actually, if we look at DE&I in and of itself, we need to unsilo DE&I. We need to unsilo it. It needs to be part of your cultural plan. If we really want to create psychological safety in the workplace, we need to stop thinking of DE&I as a standalone. We need to stop thinking of mental health as a DE&I initiative, because it's not. It is a culture initiative. And we need to broaden that so that we're not talking about groups or communities. So we really need to lean into that. And that has to come from the top down. That has to come from your CEO, your C-suite, your VPs, all the way down the line where, yes, there's access, as Sudhir had mentioned, and there's training and knowledge. Human resources needs to become a strategic partner there, a strategic partner where there's not the shame of mental health. And we already see that shame around disabilities, right? We know our employees don't feel comfortable sharing, hey, I'm dyslexic, I have a spinal injury, right? Especially that neurodiversity aspect. So if they're not willing to share their typical and atypical disabilities, you don't have psychological safety in place in your culture. So we need to start there. Unsilo it. Make this a standard, a norm, where everyone is talking about that, where all of our managers are saying to our people, what do you need to be the best of yourself today?
I love that, Lauren. And you brought up a point that I was going to bring up around normalizing the conversation. One of the things that we did more practically is make the decision to have more conversations around mental health. And we have every year we do an inclusion summit. And in that inclusion summit, we have conversations about things that are on people's minds. Sometimes we ask for feedback from our employees as to, what's on your mind? What would you like to talk about? And neurodiversity kept coming up, right? Making sure that we were dealing with matters of imposter syndrome kept coming up. Dealing with the different aspects of just how to deal with burnout and how to address our wellness kept coming up. So one of the things that my group did was partner with our Total Rewards group, who offers our benefits and offers the programming. We partnered with them so that not just during our annual summit, we would have a conversation, bring in an author, bring in someone who was known in that space to not just speak about the tenets of those ideals and where we could be on that, but how practically we could embed some things within our own culture. Having those conversations, destigmatizing it, and making it important enough as an organization for us to say, this is something we want to take a few minutes to talk about, especially post-pandemic, because after the pandemic, hit, we were all in a very unfamiliar space. It was unprecedented that we had we were dealing with things that we had never dealt with mentally, emotionally, physically. And so we just opened it up, had those crucial conversations across the organization. And that's when people know that you're willing to talk about things, it makes it so much easier for that psychological safety to begin getting created, particularly when there are people who belong to marginalized communities and they're not used to hearing these conversations out loud in, circles outside of their own. So that's one thing we did. The other thing that we did was begin to have conversations about wellness as though, it was a part of our value system. We identified where in our values wellness sat. And we champion each other, knowing that it's very important for wellness to be a part of that. So there are people who have been champions from our resource groups that have come forward, that have shared their stories, that have talked about the importance of taking care of your mental health. I actually didn't mind stepping up when our ability resource group asked for those who were familiar with organ donation. And, how do you deal with the living donor, being a living donor and, taking care of those who may have had transplants and things of that sort, because I myself am a living donor. And I will speak to that in any arena that I can so that people understand it's absolutely okay for you to ask questions, for you to get the information. Don't be afraid. Destigmatizing the whole product around it all. So having the conversations are really important, but also bringing it and building it into your organizational values is really, really important.
Yeah, I think picking up on a couple of points that have been made there, it's really good to hear, and I think it's made it. We kind of revisited our values and the culture of A&S Group with a change of leadership a couple of years ago, and this value of be you unapologetically so. It means that it's not an ad hoc. That conversations around mental health isn't a kind of ad hoc thing that we'll do for mental health awareness week or global mental health day, stuff like that. Of course we might kind of acknowledge those days, and we'll ramp up our kind of storytelling and sharing experiences around those days, but it means that when there's bad behaviors that we don't want to encourage, or when there's conversations that need to be had about leadership or managers being more supportive, it's not necessarily a conversation about mental health or diversity. It's about you not living the cultural values of A&S Group, and for someone to be part of this business and for this business to thrive and be part of something really special that we're creating. It's you've got to be living and breathing those values in the everyday. And I think a point that Sudhir made earlier about, sorry, it was Emma, about safety kind of coming first. I think that safety extends not only to people who maybe need support at a certain time with their mental health, it's also safety for those people who may be less inclined to talk openly about mental health, and they need to feel safe in getting it wrong. So I think I think when you're not involved in these conversations in your day-to-day role, I think the language around diversity and inclusion and mental health can be quite scary, and people feel really worried about getting it wrong. Because they don't know what the repercussions of that are. So I think it's really important to make it part of the normal conversation, and that's not just the usual faces who are championing conversations about mental health. It's the people who actually you wouldn't expect to talk about mental health. It's making sure they know it's okay to get it wrong. We're all on this learning journey. We're in this conversation more than most people maybe in our businesses, but everyone needs to be part of it, and so people need to feel safe getting it wrong and learning. I think that's really important. So, and part of the conversation, because we've got a value of BU, Alenda talked about total reward, our recognition system. All of that is linked to all of our values. So different values, BU is one of them. Going all in is another one. Having your eyes on the customer is another one, and people reward each other with kind of benefits points to spend according to one of those values. So it means that people are kind of championing and shouting out those examples in the everyday of people being themselves unapologetically so. So we're not badging it as a mental health support thing. It's us living and breathing our values. It's very, very normal, you know.
I wanted to add here quickly and build on what Lauren had said about a top-down. I think that's very, very important. However, when talking about top-down, we typically talk from CEO downwards, right? I think there's a very important role that the board and the investors play in prioritizing things for the organization. And while presenting to the board many times the HR deck, I have experienced myself, like they are very focused when you're talking about compensation, when you're talking about bonuses and so on. And moment the DI slides come up or engagement slides come up, they are onto their multitasking, right? They're replying to emails and so on. So it's on the board, mostly it's nobody's mission, right? And I believe it might be extremely helpful to appoint a sponsor on the board who is really looking into DI initiatives, mental wellness, and so on.
So much has been said, and I want to call out a couple of things in the comments. Specifically, I see Janice, I see you, and kind of wraps a bit of what you all are saying. Thank you, my friends. Don't make multiple strategies on D&I, well-being, and HR, etc. So Janice, I see you on there, and a lot of what's been said, the top down and disrupting and the strategic approach and the humanistic approach makes me want, and not just taking small pieces of it, but something as simple as folks still are looking or haven't seen something as simple as the diversity wheel. So I highly encourage, those that are listening in, dialing in right now, take a moment and just search diversity wheel. There's so many versions of it, but often it's found on well-being sites because you have to look at it holistically. And the diversity wheel in general is you in the middle, whether it be personality or how you operate and how you develop relationships. And then this other layer of that where the biases and the often over-strategize D&I initiatives go, whereas what we see, right, whether it be age or my guess of your age, race, ethnicity, gender, those kinds of things. And then there's these outer layers around, I wouldn't know what religion you are. I wouldn't know what your value system is. I wouldn't know those things about you that are beneath the surface. And then even organizational things. These are all big. This is all you. And, these are pieces of you, but we need to be whole. And so I definitely encourage those things. And I'll end with a small story as we transition into the strategy piece of it. And I'd love to hear from you all, our panelists today. I remember working with a CEO before, and it does start there. And I remember getting through the layers of all the administrative assistants and security that the CEO had. I mean, it was like going through all these different layers and just having a sit down conversation. And he talked about his anxiety and worry around communication because of his spectrum that he was on autism spectrum. And then just having a transgender adopted daughter, from that to also just his own anxiety of performance, and just helping him tell that story starting with the board and normalizing it, and then to the point where it grew to the town hall, and then it just grows and grows and grows, and normalizing these conversations first into actions and then the plans. Right. But it took a lot of work. I'm kind of not giving it justice there, but so many things. And that definitely starts at the top. These experiences run so quickly, my friends. I encourage folks to also connect with our panelists after, and I know they'd be enthused to help and strategize and just connect with you all. Dr. Lauren, the disruptor, I'd love to start with you, and panelists, please build on. But let's talk more about, how do we strategize? What are the examples of wins? How are we using data? How are we actually helping move this forward? Love to start with you, my friend.
I love that. So I'm going to actually take two parts of this. I'm going to leave one alone for everyone else to play with. But to embed mental health into your organization as part of your culture, you have to ritualize it. So one of the things that I've seen done and we've done is to do an Are You Okay campaign, where right for 1 week a month, every manager, every leader asks on their one-on-ones, are you okay? What's going on in your world? We're also, right, and I think this is even more prolific, right? We talk about training and education. What are we doing with our champions in the organization that can step up and be mental health supporters, and bringing in training organizations so that, and I take this from Salesforce. So Salesforce had a really large campaign. They have over 3,000 employees that are mental health advisors that have been trained, right? We're doing the same thing. I work in healthcare, so we're doing the same thing. We have, all different kinds of, we've got the mental health suicide prevention, we've got the mental health advisors, and we provide the training for that. Now let's get into really where I love to dive in, and how do we then measure that impact? And, our EAPs typically can create utilization data and dashboards. For anyone who's participating in these wellness sessions or time off for mental health, we can also look at behavioral indicators like reducing attrition or absenteeism. How often are you looking at time out, sick time, and then wondering, why are we out sick as much? Or who is out sick a lot? Who are our repeat offenders? And why is that happening? Manager accountability, right? Utilizing our mental health support behaviors in performance reviews and 360s. Are we utilizing that? That's how you measure it. That's how you see what your impact is. Trust me, when you start creating your HR dashboards and you start seeing absenteeism, time out sick decreasing, part of that is what you're doing internally to address mental health. Again, it's I'm going to say it, right? It's pulling it out of DE&I and making it mainstream from the top all the way down. Okay. Who's going next here?
I encourage anyone to build upon.
I could do next. Absolutely well said, Lauren. I think connecting it to the business outcomes and people outcomes, I think that is one of a very powerful way to showcase the impact and make it more strategic. I think one thing that HR can certainly do is go beyond just the broad demographics that we track, right? So normally we are looking at genders or age or ethnicity and so on. I think we need to create finer slices when it comes to diversity, because the needs of people are very, very different. And when we really start working with those finer slices, the impact is a lot more visible, right? So for example, if we are working with women above 50, or we are working with single parents, or we are working with veterans with disabilities, right? It is now getting into a finer slice, and we are able to then focus on their specific issues and hence create more impact for the business. And it becomes a lot more visible to the CEO, to the board, to the rest of the organization, and there's better sponsorship, therefore.
Yeah, I'll keep this really brief. I know that we're really quickly running out of time, but I think it is about it's interesting, Lauren's point on measurement. We're as a business on the whole, especially in the people team, where all of our D&I and mental health initiatives kind of sit in that team. We're focused so much on data and reporting and metrics. However, what I would say, I would caveat that with the initiatives and the kind of communication campaigns that we do. We run kind of conversations on ... So it could be anything. We'll have conversation on grief, a conversation on suicide, and there may be 3 or 4 people who will contribute to that conversation, or one of them might say, I don't want to be on camera to do a live recording, but I'll write my own personal experience in a blog. They'll even do it anonymously. So it'll say, this is my experience, but it won't have their name attached to it. And while we're very, very focused on because we've got a very small comms team, we're focused on how much resource we're putting in for how many kind of eyeballs are on that bit of content. But with the mental health content that we've produced, while there may have been less eyes on it, so less people would have watched it, because a lot of people in the relentlessness of the day-to-day don't have time to view it. It's more qualitative data. So someone might have seen a conversation on coming out at work. And for that person who's been living in masking something at work for 20 years, for that one person to view that one bit of content is almost more, it's life-changing for that person, because that's encouraged them to have the confidence and them to feel safe to come out at work, which is a huge thing. So the impact for that one person, even though it's in the terms of the data, less people have seen it, it can be life-changing, the impact that content has. So I think that's important to consider as well. So that qualitative and quantitative kind of measurement is important.
I want to jump in and add something very quickly, considering time. I think what I love about these responses is that it's really approaching this topic from a lot of different angles. And I think you need to do that to really accomplish success in this area. It's not just a one size fits all for people. So having different ways in which an organization approaches this topic creates an opportunity for people throughout the organization to connect. And one of the things that our organization did that we found really successful was to create the space. So we did that in 2 ways, right? Well, our team specifically led weekly, what we called open discussion forums, and it focused on a lot of broad topics, one of which was mental health. And what we did was every week we were there. We were there as a place for people to come, to share, to talk, to let us know what's on their mind. And so having that designated space, people didn't need to wait for a session or find a training. They knew that they could come to that place and have a space for this topic. And then in addition to that, our ERGs actually did something similar in their own way, where we had an ERG that was focused specifically around this topic. And again, they created a regular reoccurring opportunity for this. So similar to what we were talking about, where it has to be embedded in day-to-day, as the leaders of this work within the broader organization, we did have the opportunity to designate that space. And it really was a successful way to engage in the work across the organization.
Melinda, anything to add?
The only thing I'll add there is that I know that the importance of amplifying the needs of our diverse communities, just based on the fact that there is such a disparate impact of mental wellness opportunities. There are so many barriers to access within, race, gender, gender identity, etc. It's very important that the place where people spend most of their lives, which is at work, most of their hours, that they can have resources there that they can tap into, and that it's normalized, that we find ways for our champions. Like, if you don't have champions that speak to these things and that can speak to the vulnerability of their real life situations, it really won't connect. You have to find a way for it to connect. And you've created, Emma, you mentioned the spaces through your resource groups. I think every resource group, if they find that opportunity to regularly offer something, they can become champions and ambassadors for this topic in a way that it creates a very visible community for everyone across the board. And it's no longer HR's responsibility. It's no longer DE&I's responsibility. It becomes a responsibility of everyone to offer that mental health first aid, kind of.
Woo. My friends, a lot of affirmations in the chat. I hope our panelists, you all are appreciating these shout outs. Thank you all so much. As always, these experiences go extremely quick. I challenge a couple of things. One is to the notion of you're alone. You're not alone. I want to keep that very, very clear. You are not alone. You have the panelists as friends and family here. You have those that are dialing in, fellow participants. And I want to thank you all. I want to thank Hacking HR for the platform and space. As we talked about, Emma, you talked about the space, for this space and platform. I want to thank our audience for taking the time for yourselves and for others. And as we think about championing and moving things forward, I want to leave everyone with a quote, and then I'd love just your one last advice for our audience, a call to action platform, and we'll go counterclockwise this time, starting with you, Liz. But I want to leave you all with a quote here, okay? And when every individual feels seen, valued, and safe, the collective well-being of our community thrives. Again, when every individual feels seen, valued, and safe, the collective.
All right, I think you dropped off. Liz?
Should I carry on?
Yes, please.
Okay, so my kind of closing thoughts and something that I'd probably want to leave people with is, as Frank said, sorry, Frank, I just picked up from you. You dropped off there.
Yeah.
It's everybody's responsibility, and I think everyone who's listening can do something to normalize the conversation around mental health. I would appeal to all leaders, especially, to lead by example and be vulnerable. We've all got mental health. We've all got a mental health story, even if it's not something more kind of dramatic. You know, we've all got mental health. And it's close to us. And I think I would appeal to everybody's conscience to say, I know that the relentlessness of and the busyness of workplaces and businesses, especially right now, can override the softer discussions around this kind of thing. But I think we've got a responsibility to set the standards that we want to see for our children and our grandchildren. And if we don't, we've got so far to go. We can all do one thing when we drop off this call, to start a conversation, to use our one-to-ones tomorrow to ask, how are you? No, really, how are you? Let's not leave it to somebody else. Let's just take a minute to just do one small thing. And like we said earlier, the collective impact of that could be huge.
I'm going to jump back to a lens I brought in the beginning and say a thing I would encourage everyone to do is really look inside yourself and understand how you are impacting the mental health of your teams and your staff and your peers. Think about what you're doing that's really contributing to a positive experience around mental health, and challenge yourself to see where you can do better. And that's a way that each of us can have an impact as well.
I love that. Stop treating mental health as a benefit. This is a leadership competency. We need to shift our mindset to really reposition mental health as a must-have, right? Away from that reactive support system to a core driver of inclusion. And I will say one of my favorite tools that I use is the Psychological Safety and Inclusion Pulse. You can find it on Culture Amp, on Pecan, on Qualtrics. It is a quick monthly 5-question survey that I highly encourage, and I will put it in the LinkedIn chat actually where you can find it.
Lauren, we're going to have to connect, because you just inspire and empower me in a way that I'm like, yes, exactly what she said. But just to share a little bit, I know that the National Council for Mental Wellbeing has a mental first aid training that we can take so that we can understand when a situation needs a Band-Aid or when a situation may need CPR, right? When we deal with an employee who has a need, we want to be competent enough in the space so that we can address it, be it our colleague, be it whomever, right? So I would say spend some time walking through the mental wellness first aid training that's offered by that organization.
it's so easy to go last because everything that had to be said has been said. But I will say this, everything, every initiative, every aspect has a maturity model. And most of them, they start with education. So I think we'll do very well if we educate ourselves as individuals, as parents, as HR professionals in terms of what mental health means in the role that we play, and take it up from there. I think as of now, we are very low in our understanding of this entire concept of mental health. You are on mute, Frank.
Thank you. Thank you, my friends. Just want to thank again the panelists. Again, virtual round of applause. Thank you, audience. Stay with us. The next panel is an awesome jam-packed one as well. Building a human-centered organization. Thank you again. Thank you, HR, Hacking HR, and thank you, panelists and audience.
Hello, Lisa. Sorry, you're muted. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'd like to welcome you all to the Hacking HR Workplace Wellbeing and Mental Health Summit. A huge thank you to our audience that's joining from all over the globe. We're delighted to have you, and I thank you for making time for yourself today to join this discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about building a human-centered organization and how we embed mental health into leadership development and corporate cultures. So a really hot topic, top of mind for all of us HR leaders and HR professionals, and I'm super excited about it. I'd like to go ahead and have our panel of experts join. Hello, everyone. Am I on mute again?
No, we can hear you. Hello.
Yeah, that was fun. Sorry about that. Talking to no one. Good morning, everyone. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Morning.
Great.
Doing well.
Good morning. First, I just want to thank you all for being here, taking the time. Thank you to Hacking HR as well for putting these amazing summits on every month. I don't know what we would do without them. So thank you very much to everyone behind the scenes that makes this all happen. It's a lot of work. I'd like to have everyone kind of give an introduction, tell us where you're joining from, and give us a little bit of snippet of your background and expertise in this area and what inspired you to join this session today. Let's go counterclockwise and start with Amber.
Thanks, and extremely happy to be here. So I am an HR and employee experience leader. I have about 13 years within the HR landscape. Mental health has always been a very personal topic for me. And as I entered the HR landscape, and I'm going to say landscape because HR is huge. We all know this. There are different specialties. And my time as a generalist, I really started leaning more heavily into employee well-being, employee experience, as well as mental health and how work truly impacts our lives. And as we all know, especially being in these types of roles where we are seeing individuals who are going through things in their lives and it is impacting their work. And typically we are the roles who are having these discussions or coming up with different strategies. And so just through that experience, that is where my interest was sparked. And for the past 2 years, I've been studying a lot of different psychology and different topics, trying to really integrate all of these different topics, even holistic healing modalities, and trying to learn how do we make work better. We do spend most of our lives there. So how do we ensure that we're able to show up, be productive, be productive for the company, but also take care of ourselves?
Great. Thank you, Amber. Welcome. Angelique.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm joining from Florida. I am Angelique Hamilton. I'm the founder and CEO of the HR Chic Group. We are an HR consultancy for the small business and startup. And I have been a part of mental health for nearly the last 30 years that I've been in human resources. I truly feel like this is so important because it centers around people, and that's what we're discussing today. And it is so near and dear to my heart that we actually build credible leaders that can build solid foundations and create better cultures. That's why we're all here. That's why we're really in human resources and people operations. And so that's why I just took a jump at this topic. It's so important for our workforce and also so important for the world today.
Thank you, Angelique. Chip.
Sorry for being late, running around as usual. But I think just connecting with what Angelique was mentioning. So, hi everyone, I'm Chip. I head up the Global People Experience Programs, Transformation and Analytics for a global organization that has just over 31,000 people called Entain. We focus significantly around how do we provide the best-in-class experiences for our people. And I think coming from being quite a federated organization that has grown historically through a lot of M&As, we've almost absorbed multiple cultures, multiple leadership models, multiple different expectations across 42 different countries. And I think we've put some of our design around building human centricity in our culture, ways of working. So I'm really pleased to talk about almost like the role of mental health and well-being within some of the wonderful things that we've been doing in my organization, but also some of the things that I've been doing outside of work as well.
Great. Thank you, Chip. Carol, and I don't want to butcher your last name, okay?
That's fine. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me. I'm joining from Lagos, Nigeria. It's an honor to be part of the conversation today. So I work with Stanbic IBTC Bank. I'm the head of the people and culture team for the bank. I look forward to the conversations today because I feel like just talking about this topic is really at the core of what makes businesses thrive. So people really drive businesses, and for a very long time, it's mental health has really been something that is kind of like a separate conversation from what happens in the workplace. So I know that's also an evolving space as well. But ultimately, mental health affects how we lead, affects how we collaborate, affects how we perform in the workplace. So it's such a core in terms of leadership. And I think that Chip has also mentioned that as well. So if you look at leadership development and you look at the mental health conversation, it's really a core competence that leaders should have. So I just look forward to how we would unpack that today in the conversation and just learn from each other, as well as also learn from the comments that will come through in the chat room as well. So thank you.
Welcome, Carol.
Thank
Carol
you.
Pulley, our second Carol.
Hi, everyone. Good day from wherever you're joining. I'm based in Denver, Colorado. I'm a chief people officer and have more than 20 years experience in a variety of typically larger organizations going through growth and transformation. I think what started the mental health conversation for me is I spent a fair amount of my career in the healthcare space. And so from an HR practitioner perspective, a lot of what I was trying to figure out with the groups that I supported was how do we support the people in the organization that are really providing these services to our customers and to the community? And how do we walk the talk, if you will, in our own organizations? And I was lucky enough that this started a conversation earlier. It's really cemented with me as we went through COVID in the last 5 years that it's become not just a conversation around, an EAP program, but really how can we embed this in the culture? And so from my perspective, it's really been about how do we take these disparate parts of people's identities and really make sure that we're taking care of that whole person, and making the organization a safe space where people can have access and have a culture that supports them wherever their mental health may need additional support, as well as where leaders may need to support their team members in their mental health journeys.
Great. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, everyone. We have about 35 minutes or 30 minutes now. So I think I'm going to jump right in and I have questions for each of you individualized based on your impressive backgrounds. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. Amber, I'm going to start with you if that's okay. Traditionally, leadership models and hierarchy and org charts have leaned on consequences as well as rewards when it comes to performance, and oftentimes it's tied to monetary. How can more organizations commit to developing that human-centered culture with new frameworks that help embed mental health into leadership development? How do we make them accountable?
Yeah, great. So traditionally, we do have two overarching leadership models. We've got the stick or fear consequences, or the carrot, so incentives, rewards, bonuses, things like that. But both are transactional and neither are really sustainable, especially now that we're seeing the introduction of AI. But we also have 5 generations in the workplace right now. And each of those generations has different motivators. But what is consistent is that over 50% of all of those different generations within the workplace say that mental health and people first leadership are critical retention factors. So what we are seeing now and what we're going to continue to see, and is actually I'm sorry, it was actually an approach that the other panel members have already mentioned, is safety. So I'm calling it the net, like a safety net, but it's psychological safety as infrastructure, but also performance strategy. So in this current landscape, with everyone having different motivators, money isn't going to work for everyone. There's a lot of different things that are happening right now. So what can we do? We can create an environment built on safety. Now, where do we start with that? We have already been talking about psychological safety for a while, but we really do need to embed this into our leadership development. So it's going to be moving beyond the traditional skill building, teaching emotional intelligence, empathy, communication skills, everything that has been traditionally considered more soft. And so that's definitely part of the framework. But then we definitely need to ensure that leaders are evaluated not just on how they deliver outcomes, so profit, but how are they fostering safety? We need to be evaluating on culture. So to wrap it up, we've tried the stick, we've tried the carrot, fear and reward really built the systems that we're currently working with. But in my opinion, safety is what is going to help us move forward and really take the future of work. Bring work into 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you touched on, that that fostering that safety, right? And that, that's not an easy thing to do, right? And especially when leadership teams are often ill-equipped, right? And don't know how to unlock that, right? And they don't understand how to be empathetic. They don't understand that vulnerability does not make you vulnerable. It actually makes people trust you more, and it actually makes you relatable, right? And I think that there's some really good ideas there, and we'll talk a little bit more about them, of tactical ways that we can help them, right, get there. Thank you, Amber. Angelique, you ready?
Yes. Always.
What role does continuous training, and this is partly what was in my head about what Amber was talking about, and fostering that open communication, transparent communication, play in your opinion in making mental health discussions a norm, right? And removing that stigma, right? Not only among employees and leaders, but across organizations, that across teams, right? It's not always just one-on-one, right? Teams are involved in this as well. And how do we promote this in organizations?
I know that's a lot to take in terms of for a leader, but what I would say, open communication starts first with building trust and creating transparency. It's one thing to say to your employees that you care about them, but modeling those behaviors, having those behaviors at the forefront as a leader, that employees feel that they can really trust you. They can trust in what the work is being done. They can also trust in you as that leader who is overseeing that employee. One of the things that I've noted in terms of the open communication too, is that we are in a world where everything is moving at a very quick pace. It's very quickly moving. There are so many things that our employees are bringing into the workplace that are not, centered around business. They're worried about the economic factors, inflation. What are they going to be doing in the next day? There's not only their well-being, there's so many things that are encountering within the actual workspace that it's difficult for employees to truly perform at that best level. So creating that environment where there's open communication, open dialogue, whether you have one-on-one direct conversations with your team stand-ups, if there's round tables, having an open forum so people feel comfortable sharing those behaviors. There was a survey just done last month by Ipsos that stated nearly a third of those respondents, what worries the world in that survey, that 33% of those individuals really fear about the economic factors. So how in the workplace can we create communication that employees can share about that? That's one of the number one factors that employees are concerned about their jobs and their well-being. Secondly, when we talk about not only open communication, but you also mentioned on the latter portion, continuing education. That is important as a leader. That should start day one. I think what happens is leaders come in, whatever behaviors and whatever role modeling that they had in their prior place of employment, they bring it to the new place of employment. And we need to start from day one. What do we expect out of leaders? And as my peers have shared, that should be a competency for everyone, that you are required to be able to not only converse in a regular conversation with your team, but also being able to explain to them on how you want them to relate within the team environment. So it should start from day one and carry through that journey while the employee is there at the employer. So continuous education, whether that's mental health first aid, there's a leadership training once a quarter. It shouldn't be a check the box, one-time seminar, one-time lunch and learn. It should be a regular cadence that you're providing not only to your leaders, but your employees are leaders as well, that you're providing to every employee, because mental health impacts everyone aside from leadership. So I just think there's just a myriad of things that goes on between the employee and also between the leader that we can really create a great environment or workforce.
And if I'm allowed to pitch in, I think today and yesterday we've also explored a little bit of the stigma related to mental health. what Angelique just so eloquently positioned is some of the communications and training take away some of the stigma. It opens the conversation to say this is one of the environments and the places where we're allowed to talk about mental health. This is a workplace where you're allowed to bring emotions, whether some days it's high, some days it's low. You're allowed to come in with fully emphasized emotions that you're living through and bring them into that environment. There's this element even for leaders to feel permission that talking about mental health and talking about permission is not a weakness. It is emotion that brings that human connection to each other. And Angelique just spoken about the future leaders as well in your organization. So not just the people that you're focusing most of your energy as an HR leader as well, but how do you build that environment that almost like fickles and drives some of that emotion. We should talk about mental health. We should talk about emotion. We should recognize that some days are good and some days are bad. We should recognize that maybe we're struggling some days. It's just how do we get some of that ring fenced support at work and at home and in other places to make sure that we're constantly like winning, even if it's a little bit, we're winning towards making workplaces better.
Yeah, thank you, Chip. Okay, so I'm going to stick with you there. You're next. How do you, and you're working with a larger organization, and so you have more structure in place, right? Tell me how you have embedded in the core org design, right? A culture, systems, leadership behaviors, kind of all of it into your organization. Like what's worked for you and maybe what hasn't.
And I think that's such an important conversation because sometimes we treat mental health as being like a separate agenda rather than the business agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the intro that I've done, and I've noticed like we've touched on generations and multiple different people and cultures being in the workplace. We all have different needs and we also have different expectations. And we come, whether it's generational, whether it's circumstances, whether it's identity, whether it's background, whether it's location in the world, we all have different expectations of what we're stepping into at work. So if I look at Entain as an organization, we have anywhere from like retail and people that like are cleaners and they come and clean our shops in retail, all the way through like metaverse programming and advanced AI building and everything else. So like the skills expectation across those different populations and the expectations of why these people come to work is significantly different. And we've started shifting a little bit more of around how do we design experiences at work and how do we put people experience at the core of some of our decisions, whether it's org design, whether it's values, whether it's leadership development or mechanism on how people interact with us. And we've put personas and we've started tackling the needs, wants, and almost like emotional connections of different personas to the organization in all of those designs. We've come back with 6 principles that allow us to make sure that we're designing for the majority, but we're taking into considerations the needs of the few. We started looking at the emotional connection that people are having with our values, that how people are navigating our intranet, how people interact with HR with HR functions. We've looked at whether there's enough connection and whether there's like a historical element of how people connect with someone supporting them through HR, or whether there's a need of a change around it. So we've done like behavior analysis on some of that work just to be able to iron out specifically what is it that we're looking for here. How do we design for some of these people, for them to feel safe, welcoming, trusted, enabled, and connected to the organization, to the manager, and to the teams that they're part of. We haven't found this miracle solution yet, because if it was, I would have probably sold it and made a few billion pounds on it. But it is like a prototype and an evolving conversation, because even the way I've looked in the past on some of these things and what I'm doing now at Entain, even some of those needs have evolved, and they have evolved because technology has changed. We now have different expectations of the type of tools that we're working with. HR has evolved, and therefore we don't necessarily expect HR to do a lot of things for us. We want to be self-sufficient and more independent. So like all of these different needs are evolving over time. And this is just a span of 5 years. Imagine what we're going to do in the next 5 years as well.
Yeah. And Chip, I'm going to kind of roll back to you. Your company's been doing a lot of M&A, and that has to be challenging for especially for a large organization as you're, building your roadmap, right, for HR and talent and experience. Touch a little bit on how you think about, because these are individuals that we're not interviewing to come into the company, they're dropping in, right? A lot of those people, we inherit them, right? And that's another challenge, right? Yeah. Is what was their culture like, and how is this going to be potentially a shock or whatever? Tell us a little bit about how you approach that.
Maybe not as mindful that I would have hoped for in the past few years. Mm-hmm. So we've had years in the past where we'd have done like 6 M&As, anywhere from 2,000-3,000 to 46 people in organization. It was very much targeted around building portfolios and entering markets and understanding. So mostly the reasons why you would do M&As anyway in some of these environments. And in some regards, we've done not just the mergers and acquisitions, but we've done the integration as well. In some elements, we've allowed them to run quite independently with some of the mechanisms they had, because they still have some of that spirit and some of that emotion and some of that culture. And almost like the transition and the mental transition of I'm an employee into a startup, that I have like a beer fridge under my desk and we throw parties every Friday and we have quite a vibrant, energetic view, and we make decisions as we fly. Coming into a 30,000 people organization that needs to have significantly more governance, rigor, cost analysis, and everything else is a significant shift. So for a lot of these parts of the organization where we said that the transition is going to be too significant, let's phase that across a period of time to understand what are the elements in that culture that we would want to retain and still protect the people, versus what are the ones where we're providing more principles and guidance rather than governance and frameworks. So it is still a journey. We're not a unified organization at the moment. We have about 24,000 people in what we call the central organization. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of 6,000 are still part of the federated model with the individual HR teams, but working under the same principles and under the same technology as the rest of the group. And then we have some of the joint ventures as well that are even more distant from that, but we share one ethos, one identity, and one philosophy.
Oh, great. I feel like that could be a whole nother panel discussion. Carol Cooley, in your experience, what do you think are the biggest barriers organizations face when deciding to prioritize mental health, right? Not only at the leadership level, but at the cultural level, right? And how can we as HR professionals help overcome those challenges or remove those barriers, or at least make them a little easier?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I think there's so many different facets to that. We've talked about some of them here on the panel. One of the things that I think is kind of really at the top of that, you mentioned leadership. And I think it's really the way that leadership reacts to mental health in the organization. So often, I think, I know Angelique mentioned it as well. There's such a dynamic change in the pace of business, and things are changing so rapidly that I think traditional leaders have been kind of trained and conditioned to deal solely with the business dynamics, and having to shift and change business priorities and strategies very quickly I think it's not a part of the DNA in a lot of organizations to look at what the implications to the people side of that are, whether that's, shift direction, or that's their mental health, or, as we've also talked about on this panel, what are the external factors that are causing concern in your employee population. So I think bringing awareness to that is at least a start that organizations can think about that, and think about the different aspects that maybe they haven't thought about in the past. The second thing that I'll mention as a potential barrier is, another thing that we've talked about here on this panel, which is just the leadership capability in engaging in these types of conversations and knowing what to do to try and build that psychological safety in the organization. And they tend, a lot of people don't know what to do, so they may get stuck. I know a lot of organizations will go to their HR team to try and dissolve, or really think about what these situations are and how can we help individuals. I'm not equipped to do it, so let's have HR do it. But I think if we start to embed some of those capabilities in the organization, you're creating a larger bench to be able to deal with the issues that are presented in front of you versus funneling it all into kind of one particular group. And I think, for me, the strongest skill that you might be able to embed in your leadership is the ability to listen. And you don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to come to the table and solve people's problems. You just have to be able to listen. And I was actually watching a German movie last night, and I think this goes to the cultural capability as well, as we're driving into global companies, or we're dealing with multiple generations in the workforce. I was watching this German movie last night, and the woman in the movie was talking to her young son and said that, the person's going to ask you how you are, just answer fine, because in America, that is perfectly acceptable answer, and nobody's going to ask you any other questions. And that really struck me coming into this panel today, that I think it's a part of not only listening to what people are saying, but what they're not saying, and also thinking about what's the cultural capability that you need to have to listen beyond the answers that someone may give you at first blush.
Yeah. When anyone in my one-on-one, when I ask how you are, they say they're fine, that's an immediate red flag for me. You're not fine. Like, that word is not fine, right? That there's something I need to dig in on. So thank you for pointing that out. I have a question for you to add on to that. How important do you think flexibility and agility is in leadership teams, in adopting and learning? How much do you think that is important, and how do we help them potentially build those skills?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. That's a great point, Lisa. I think, anymore, as I talked about, the pace of change is ever accelerating. So if people aren't learning, changing, growing, they're falling behind more frequently than ever. So I think it's really important for not just leaders, but for everybody to be able to be more agile and more flexible. And that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And I'll go back to kind of what I said just a second ago, which is you don't necessarily need to have the answers or make assumptions about what flexibility and agility means. You can engage in a conversation around that as well. And I think offering flexibility to employees is something certainly that leaders have within their tool belt to be able to do. And flexibility may look very different from one employee to another. So I think just being able to engage in that conversation around what's changing, what's not changing, is a good start and a good foundation for leaders to be able to kind of translate that to their employee population. But certainly it does need to be a part of their toolkit. And I think if you're creating the ability to have those conversations around what flexibility and agility means in our organization, and how that's manifesting in people's work lives, I think you're then better able to, again, engage in those conversations and highlight the people in your organization that are really better at change and adaptability, and maybe draw on them as champions for that work. Again, not so that you're stacking them with all the change responsibility, but you're broadening your network within the organization, and that in turn will broaden the capability.
Great. Thank you, Carol. Carol Ulei, I think I did that right. We talked a lot about how we embed awareness into leadership teams. And I'm wondering if you can share with us some specific initiatives or trainings that you've done in your career that you have found work really well, and have the metrics around it, support that it's working.
Yeah, and thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Carol, as well. I like the lens that you brought in terms of the generations in the workplace, and just how that in itself actually does have an impact in terms of what the focus is, how how they react to situations in the workplace, just generally how response to life events, all of that is really shaped by the context as well. And that's also an important consideration as HR professionals, as you look to say, how do you build that human-centered leadership within the workplace that is also focused in terms of the mental health conversation. So some of the practical things that I've seen that have worked is really, first of all, just seeing people as human beings. Really, it's a culture, building a culture that is human first, building a culture where you see people really for who they are. So an employee is beyond the number, an employee is beyond the resource, an employee is first of all a human being. So one of the really, and I think it's something that I've seen that has been deeply successful, is just having that human first culture. And like we've all rightly said, it rises with leadership. So if you do get the leadership team to see people as humans, so just building an awareness around seeing people as humans, understanding emotions that people bring into the workplace as well. And also looking at how just as human beings, we would have real life challenges. It's not every day that we'll be operating at 100%. Some days would be at 50%, some days would be at 70%. How do you, as a leader, react in those situations? So it's really equipping leaders to understand humanity, if I may put it that way. So understanding human beings, understanding how do you lead a diverse team? How do you lead people across different age groups? How do you lead people across different generations? How do you respond to mental health issues in the workplace? So the first thing really is around education. So education around just being human at first, and then also the mental health awareness at the leadership level, because really the tone at the top kind of sets what happens across the organization. So that's one point that I've seen really practical. Something else that I've also seen that has really worked is leaders listen. And I think someone had spoken to that as well. So there are also simulations, and I'm sure there are other tools as well that just sort of help leaders practice listening. And practicing listening helps you hear beyond what is being said, also helps you hear the softer issues as well that are not sometimes left unsaid as well. Just as we're talking about it, we ask someone, how are you? And the person says fine. Does that really mean that the person is fine? So I've seen the leaders listen simulation also something that helps get leaders to be able to just listen better. And as you listen better, you can then also use the other tools that are available within the organization as well to drive that culture of being human-centric within the organization. I think I'll drop here. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carol. I have like 20 questions that we're not even going to make it to, because here we are at the 40-minute, and like I said, I think we could talk for 3 hours, but here we are. So
is it worth if I give you 30 seconds of some more ideas to add in that leadership development? And this is across different organizations that I've been on.
Yeah,
I'll be quick.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to take a minute to thank everyone, thank all of you. I want to thank our audience for making the space and joining us today and prioritizing that growth mindset and learning. We appreciate you. Keep joining. Thank you also to Hacking HR for continuing to put on amazing summits. We talked a lot about a lot of stuff, and like they could all be their own sessions. But I thought maybe if we could go around and each of you could maybe share what you might think of or suggest as a game-changing or a priority policy, program, initiative that companies can implement potentially quickly to improve that workplace mental health awareness acceptance. Let's start with Amber.
Thanks. Yes. So I would say the one thing would be, start to have these conversations with leadership and start, considering tying mental health and fostering safety into performance evaluations for your leaders. And the second piece would be just model repair. So if a leader, does something specifically in a remote company on a Slack, help coach that leader to repair. We're not perfect. We're all humans and we all have emotions. So employees seeing repair and public accountability with support is going to increase trust. And that will also increase safety.
Thank you, Amber. Angelique.
Yeah, so I would just tell everyone out there, if you're a leader, to be consistent and genuine in your approach in dealing with your employees. It's about creating a dialogue, opening up that dialogue, being very authentic when you're dealing with them. They will respect you and build that trust, as we talked about earlier, and just share your own experience. They learn by doing. So if you can just share your open experiences with your employees, they're more than happy to continue to foster that relationship that you have together. And just remember, we're all human and we work day to day by each other. And so just as Sip said, some days are good days, some days are bad days. But if we continue this dialogue and continue these conversations, we can create a workplace that's for all.
Thank you, Angelique. Chip.
I think that was a great example. What I'll add to it is make leadership development for mental health a mandatory training, same as compliance. It is a prerequisite of everyone within the organization, if they are in a leadership position, to go through mandatory mental health training that is attached to the leadership development. And that includes you, because first and foremost, you need to put your oxygen mask first before you help others. As an HR leader, you need to look after yourself and make sure that you're modeling some of those behaviors, but also you're going to go through some intense period of time of supporting all of these other leaders. So if you need to look after yourself to begin with. And some examples in there is think about how do you bring cognitive behavior science into some of that leadership development and the tools that you give leaders to make them better connected to their employees. And like some programs that I've been through are literally called the connected manager or the connected leader. In some sessions, we brought either a therapist or a neuroscientist to talk about like leadership under pressure and understanding in some of these circumstances how leadership can make a significant difference for your team. Bring personal stories. So there's nothing to what Angelique mentioned. There's nothing more powerful than some of those personal stories. And me coming into some of these sessions and saying, yes, I have had a team member that did not turn up for work on Monday and I was worried. And after we've gone through all of the investigation and declaring them AWOL, we find out that they passed away. And we had to mourn as a team and as a function, not just as an individual of working with this person for a while. If you don't have some of those strong stories in the organization, borrow, steal. There's this great project called A Mile in My Shoes, where you have all of these different recorded stories from people that are either around diversity and inclusion or around mental health or around stress or anything else. We've done literally museum and leaders came in, had to take shoes out of a box, put the shoes on their feet, where some of them were high heels and made people uncomfortable, and listen for 5 minutes on an iPod a story from someone else's perspective of how they've dealt with some of that story. So it was an immersive experience for them to understand what's happening in someone else's brain and how they navigate some of these life challenges. So there's plethora of different stories and examples and great things that we can build into our leadership development. Just don't leave them being boring. Make them exciting. Make them intrusive into people's minds.
Yeah. Healthy uncomfortableness is always good. Thank you, Chip. Carol.
Yeah, just to add to what all that has been said, I would say it's not an event, so it's something that we have to, as HR professionals, working with the leadership team, be intentional about. So 3 things I would say, and it's continuous. There's education, there's reflection, and there's action, and it's something that just continues. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Carol Cooley.
Very quickly, I would just highlight that oftentimes it doesn't need to be another program or another initiative. I think thinking about it holistically and really helping employees connect the dots on a lot of the programs and things that you already offer, whether that's flexibility or bereavement leave policies or other mental health support within the organization. If you help the employees connect the dots to all of the different resources that are available, that points to that culture where mental health can be talked about in the organization.
I like that, Carol. Doing an audit of your systems is good. I'm a big fan of minimizing tool sprawl. So there's that. Okay, so thank you, everyone. I'm just going to end this with mental health awareness in our organizations is not a nice to have anymore. It's a must have. So if you leave with anything, please leave with the initiative that it is a must have. Thank you, everyone. I hope to see you all soon.
Hello, welcome everyone to the final session of Hacking HR's Workplace Wellness and Mental Health Summit. I hope you've had an amazing experience learning, sharing ideas, connecting with the panelists, and most importantly, building community around these very critical topics that are impacting our workplace. I'm Angela Delgado-Sitch. I'm the Director of People Operations for Counselor. Counselor is a mental health support app that provides 24/7 care with licensed mental health professionals through TechSpace. I'm very proud of this organization. We are working closely with HR and management and hope you'll check us out. But I'd like for us to get started in this final session entitled Sustaining the Momentum, Ensuring Mental Health is a Business Priority Beyond Awareness Months. And I'd like to start this off by asking our panel to introduce themselves. Brittany, would you like to kick that off for us?
Sure, absolutely. So, hello, my name is Brittany Lindsay. I'm the founder and principal HR consultant as well as fractional chief people officer of a HR consulting firm, which is Evolve HR. I work with startups and small to mid-sized businesses across the U.S. to help them build thriving workplaces. And in addition to that, I also provide some leadership training and development. I'm very excited to be here. I'm based out of the Houston, Texas area, and I'm just looking forward to this conversation.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. Christy?
Hi, Angela, nice to meet you. Good to see you, Brittany and David. I'm Christy Honeycutt. I'm the SVP of Strategy and Execution for a company called Appy here. We're a recruitment automation company. So my nod to mental health is helping our teams have less work to do and be more purposeful in their day-to-day work. And also, I'm a yoga instructor, meditation coach, and Reiki practitioner. So I'm all about this this event that we're doing, and we wanted to just bring health and happiness to our community. So thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Wonderful. David.
Hey everyone, my name's Dave Greenwood. I am the author of 2 books, Overcoming Distractions, and then the latest is Overcoming Burnout. And Overcoming Burnout is a book that I wanted to read when I was going through burnout, and it profiles about a dozen people who went through, I guess, hell and back. Not only their stories, but what they had to do, the street smart approaches they need to implement to actually recover from burnout, prevent it from happening again, and actually live a fulfilling life and have a fulfilling career. And I work individually with a number of people like that, both adult ADHD and people with burnout, and when they both collide.
Wonderful. Fantastic. I think this is all I'm seeing for the panelists today. I did see, I think, Colin trying to dial in. I think there might have been a technical issue, but we'll go ahead and proceed and hope they can join us. The first question I'd like to start out with is, anybody feel free to jump in on this. How do you find workplace well-being and mental health? And why is it important for individuals and organizations to prioritize it? Anybody want to jump in? Christy?
Look, we're all here because we love people. Like, if you're here because you love people. So people are our most valuable resources, regardless of technology, regardless of what's going on. So we need to protect them. We need to make sure that they're purposeful, they're happy, they feel fulfilled, and that we are creating frameworks so they don't burn out. It is crucial. It's crucial to retention. It's crucial to revenue. There's so many optics to our people. I take a hard approach with it. And for me, I want anybody I work with or who works for me just to feel empowered, engaged, and ready to tackle the world.
Wonderful. David, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, and I'll preface my comments by saying I'm the only one on the panel that is not an HR professional. My experience in these comes from the people who have burned out, including myself, and working with them. But hearing from people that I've worked with and interviewed over the years, some words come to mind: respect, dignity, human-centered, purpose, fulfillment, accountability, values, safety, and opportunity for growth. And I think that's what people want when they're in a workplace.
Wonderful. Well, I will say that we love diversity of thought, so you're definitely welcome here. Brittany.
Absolutely. So for me, of course, workplace well-being and mental health, I see it as a reflection of how companies value its people. I know I tapped into one of the conversations yesterday, and someone mentioned like leading the whole people, like the whole person, the whole human in itself, and that really stuck with me, because workplaces have to be intentional in creating these environments where people feel safe, they feel valued, they feel heard. They're able to come to work and do meaningful work, and as a result, that's going to play out in employee well-being. It's going to play out with greater profits, right? Greater customers. And so it's very important. I think when we think about like from an organizational or from an individual perspective, right, and how it ties to social responsibility, there's this, it allows employees to really connect and have, they set boundaries, right? They're more vocal about the things that they need to help them succeed. And so it's really just all about, helping companies take a holistic approach to mental health and well-being.
Great. Well, we've spent the last 3 days talking about workplace well-being and mental health.
We have some internet gremlins today.
You'd think it was Friday.
I mean, I hope that we would like freeze in the most delightful way, but no one ever does.
That's true. That is true. Let's see if we get Angela back here.
Pop in the chat.
Yeah.
Hey,
she's back.
Back, right? I could see you. Let me ask the question again. Perhaps that would work. I mentioned we've spent the last 3 days talking about workplace well-being and mental health. And I'd like to know what mind shift needs to happen around defining the value of prioritizing mental health and well-being within the organization.
Okay. I think she kind of froze. Okay.
When do you want to start?
I can go ahead and start and take that. So for me, I believe that there definitely has to be a mindset shift from this transactional reactive thinking, like, oh, mental health is just more of a cost center, it's kind of like a distraction uh, to the business, or shifting from it being just a nice to have benefit to really shifting to it being a strategic and proactive benefit that really enables the success of the company. I think if we, as HR professionals, we have to gain that buy-in. So sometimes in gaining that buy-in, that may look like having to speak the language of our business leaders and executives in the company. So really positioning this as a capacity and performance building driver of business success. And that's just kind of like my thought process around how we can really position it from just, not just being about culture, but also being tied to performance of the business.
Great response. Christy, would you like to add to that? I believe you're on mute, Christy.
And hopefully nobody can read my lips because that was a cuss word. Internet gremlins.
It's all right. We're talking about mental health.
I'm obviously having a day.
Mhm.
I think it's important for us to collectively change our set to be more human centric. I mean, we're living in the age of so much technology and AI and pressure, COVID, political environment. There's so much, and we all come from different backgrounds, both seen and unseen. You don't know what's happened to me in the past 24 hours. There's so many different things. So I think we just have to wake up in the morning, put our shoes on, put a big smile on, regulate ourselves, and then go into the office and be more human with each other. So as much as we want to talk about organizations taking a lane this way or the other, as individuals, you can stand up and create change in yourself and the people that you interact with each day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. David, any thoughts?
I think if we're talking mindset, there was a phrase that somebody used in my book, Overcoming Burnout, about we're co-founders of our burnout. And there's a big debate whether burnout's not your fault or et cetera, et cetera. And I believe there is some shared responsibility for burnout. I think from the organizational point of view, I think leadership needs to do a better job of understanding not only what burnout looks like, but the complexities of burnout as well. Burnout isn't just like a big pile of file folders dropped on your desk and you have to work all weekend. There's 100 factors that could make somebody feel burned out or exhausted or feel trauma. And we need to understand that. One big thing that I think people need to kind of take note of is we have a rapidly aging population, and more of our team members and employees are starting to assume caregiving responsibilities. These people may be tired before they even get to their desk in the morning. So we can't just say, all right, let's reduce so-and-so's workload. Let's give them a long weekend, okay, so to speak. We need to understand what's actually driving these behaviors or exhaustion, stress, etc.
If I may add, David, you made me think of something. So a wise CEO I was speaking to last week told me, what you're not changing, you're choosing.
Mm-hmm.
So that goes back to like your co-founder thing, right? Like, so often we choose to stay in that where we are. That was very, very powerful. And I'm looking forward to getting your book, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you.
Fantastic. Well, that leads me into our next question. What are some of the actions or resources or even strategies organizations should consider to encourage employee engagement and utilization of programs they may have or tools that are available to them, to protect their well-being, especially from burnout? Anybody have any thoughts there? Maybe David?
Yeah, again, I think I'd go back to what can we do, or what are we doing at the organizational level that may be fueling mental health challenges or burnout or absenteeism, et cetera, et cetera. There was a woman I interviewed in my book where she was burnt out. She was actually losing weight. She had all sorts of digestive issues. Her boss was really cool though, and when she said, "I just need a long weekend, I need to take a few days off," the guy was like, "Great, go ahead, just bring your laptop." "Oh, you're going on vacation? Just bring your laptop." So they were not playing the full game, so to speak. They were like, "Oh, great, go ahead, take a few days off. I know you need to relax, but just stay connected, okay?" And we need to do our part to make sure that that isn't part of the trade for time off, or et cetera, et cetera. Is that, oh, you'll be here, but you can take the time off. So I think that's just one thing in general. I think we underestimate the constant connectedness in fueling these mental health challenges in the workplace.
Mhm. Yeah. I love that. For me, I think I would definitely add on to it. It's really about creating moments that really matter, right? So the small moments, the way that the leaders in these organizations, the way that they're interacting with their teams, the way that they're leading their teams, having conversations with your team to find out, how they're doing. Every conversation doesn't have to be tied to performance, right? So really reframing it and really being human centered in your approach with your team. And then also figuring out what they have the bandwidth and capacity to take on. Earlier in my career, I had a boss that was very intentional with asking, hey, what does your capacity look like? You have the capacity to take this on. And by him just saying those simple words really empowered me to want to, speak up about, how I was feeling, in the workplace as it relates to mental health and my well-being. So
If I might add real quick, you talked about communication. There's a famous quote about the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So I think we need to recognize that maybe we thought we communicated, but maybe we didn't.
Yeah.
I think from and I agree with both what Brittany and David said. I think from a structural perspective, if you look at a framework of getting engagement, right, it's going to come down to onboarding, ensuring the people you're onboarding understand the resources that they have for them. Hopefully those have been built in place to have peer mentors or whatever that looks like. It's, being strategic and helping your leaders. When I was a chief people officer for an organization, we took the entire leadership team through studies on how to identify risk and how to get involved quickly and how to mitigate it. But then also, like Brittany said, it's encouraging people to speak up. And a lot of times we do hear from our employees what's causing them stress, but you have to listen with open ears to be able to navigate that and then champion change for them. So for instance, I worked with an organization that had 5 different systems for the same thing. The team was about to lose their mind. And that was an easy fix. Audit, boom, down to 1. Everybody's happy. You've got AI that can automate a lot of stuff for you guys, depending on what you're doing. There's several different ways that you can build your strategy. But I think at first you have to look at, what's your population? What are the deficiencies? What are the absentee trends? Like, what are you seeing? Where is work falling down? Where's the gap? And then just kind of start to kind of pull that together. But I think empowering your leaders to see the signs, creating a framework, and then also empowering your team members to know that these are the actions and levers they can pull if and when they need those is perfect. And be human. Like when you have a death or a birth, or you have something, like do special moments, right? To acknowledge the humanity in those spaces and raise that energy level up. Sorry, I'm so woo. I know you guys are going to go crazy.
I love it. Absolutely. I love what you said about humanity. We're all people here and we're working together. Let's not forget that, right? I know we get tied up and we get sidetracked with metrics and results and all of these wonderful things that we all strive to, but we have to recognize we are all humans. So next question I'd like to bring up has to do a little bit with productivity and metrics, because we know that there is definitely an issue here. We have to tie our productivity to metrics to prove our results a lot of times. But we had a really interesting session yesterday measuring what matters, tracking and evaluating workplace well-being initiatives for real impact. And the former president of Northwell Hospital, Michael Goldberg, gave us a stat. He had told us that when employees are engaged, the margin rate is 21% higher. So we know that there is definitely a benefit to doing so in terms of getting people engaged and on board. But I'd really like for us to talk about what is it beyond those traditional types of metrics that we look at, like absenteeism, productivity, and retention, that we all should be considering. Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, so I think that for me, of course, when we interact with these leaders and they're really wanting to know like what is the return of investment, right? They're usually looking for the data, for the numbers, of how is this going to drive my bottom line, right? And yes, those things are important, like your absenteeism, retention of employees. Those are all very important. But I think it's more critical to even just kind of dig deeper into that topic, right? Because mental health, it actually does, it impacts how people are showing up, it impacts how they collaborate, it impacts innovation, and impacts how we lead. So in reality, I think that the question should kind of be shifted from, hey, what would this actually cost us, to reframing our mindset to what would be the price or risk we'll pay in the long run if we do not invest in our employees' mental health and approaching it from there.
I think one of the biggest metrics an organization can look at is purpose, and that can be different for many industries. But I'll give you an example. I used to run a full-fledged public relations firm, and I've worked with a collection agency for many years, and every single person in this company, and they are about 75 now, it's a fairly medium-sized company, all feels a purpose, because the first line of what they do is to start to help the consumer that is in debt first, instead of just going after the money. They have pretty much rewired debt collections that way to, hey, how can we help you pay this bill? Okay. And they have people who have been at this collection agency for 20 years. And if you know anything about that industry, it is rough, to say the least. People are getting yelled at. But my point is that most people in this company feel a sense of purpose because they're helping a consumer out of a bad situation. And yes, they help their client recover their money. So if I had to talk about metrics, and I'm not even sure how to measure this because, again, I'm not an HR practitioner, but take a look at how your people are talking about the company. Do they have purpose? Do they feel like they're being able to help people at the end of the day?
David, I love what you said, because if this is done properly, you're going to have the people at the organization speaking positively about the organization they work at. They're going to be mission driven. They're going to be your best advertisers, your best PR, right?
Yeah.
So then ultimately, not to go back to metrics, but what you're going to see is uptick in inbound applications, uptick of employee referrals. Like that costs money. Like you're going to get all of these things, right? The retention, obviously, but the retention of tribal knowledge that comes from being around for 20 years, and what innovation and insight that person can bring to the organization as a whole. So yeah, it's much more over the KPIs, but again, it goes back to humanity and somebody being able to see the bigger picture. We need smarter leaders that understand the bigger picture.
Yeah. I will also add one very quick thing. There are 4 owners to this company, and they all sit in the cubicles with the employees. There are no closed offices. They sit right there next to the employees. They're part of the team, everybody. So.
Yeah, I love that. And you know what? I always say that, in consulting with clients, oftentimes your people, they may not appear line by line on your P&L statement, right? But the impact of their work and of their well-being and their creativity, it is going to show. So, just being able to, going back to what you stated, just connecting it to purpose and in humanity, that is the real driver of business success.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Basic question here. What challenges have you seen that have kept mental health from being a constant business priority?
Funding.
Funding.
We don't have budget. This doesn't matter. We need these things, right? And I think for me, it goes back to, look, depending on where you sit and what your responsibilities are, there's different sizes of organizations. You've got your startups that are a little bit, guerrilla, and they've got to figure out how to do things on their own. But I don't think that changes regardless of the budget. If you don't have the budget, there are things you can do. You can have speakers come on. You can have David come on and talk to your team about burnout and reasons why not to. Like there are, you can hire Brittany to come in and do a framework. Hire Angela for that. There's so much stuff, but it's budget. So it's finding what do you have to spend? What can you trade to get justification and finances to spend? What executive leadership can you get bought into? And what is their why that they need to have a little, okay, Bob, if you do this, your retention's going to go up XYZ. This is your personal pain point. Like meet with those executives and get that buy-in. Maybe you can get a little bit from their budget, but there are things you can do. And I think it doesn't matter. Even if your budget is you showing up and being nice to one other person that day and bringing them Starbucks, like just start anywhere, frankly.
Yeah.
I love that collaboration in a way that you're able to obtain some of their budget. Way to go, Christy. I like that concept.
Coffee.
Brittany, do you have something? Pardon me. Yes. Brittany, excuse me. Do you have something to add?
Yes, everything that Christy mentioned, I can definitely echo from that. I would definitely also say just one of the challenges that I've often seen is companies rolling these initiatives out, and they're not tracking the impact of whether or not this is actually working. No one is being held accountable, right? And when we put these initiatives in place, the only way that we're going to measure its true impact is if we are holding people accountable. So right, maybe connecting it to a performance KPI metric. Another challenge I can definitely say I've seen organizations kind of miss or drop the ball on is this thinking that, hey, we're going to roll out this employee assistance program or this meditation app, but it doesn't necessarily stay top of mind with employees because no one is continuously communicating that, hey, we have this app here or we have this EAP program available for in the event that you need it. And don't get me wrong, because there are some meditation apps that are out there that I have actually rolled out with some of my clients that really do take a strategic approach, especially as it relates to working with HR to provide them with toolkits and communications and things that they can roll out to ensure that it stays a continuous yearly, ongoing framework instead of just a one-time initiative.
Yeah.
Apologies. I think
We're back.
Away for a moment, but I'm back. So I
didn't
there. So sorry about that.
I always like to, Brittany, I always like to tell people that even if somebody had Spotify, they could find a 5-minute meditation, just quick, there's everything from stress to whatever. So,
Right.
So speaking of budget, so.
Yes, there are a number of free complimentary tools available, whether it's a daily newsletter or a motivational piece you're listening to on a podcast. There are a number of wonderful people on LinkedIn, as we all know, where you can obtain information. I follow a gentleman by the name of Adam Morris, who's fantastic. Very simple pieces. Other things we have, we have an app called Guinea Pig that provides 1 to 2 minute breaks right there at your desk where you can practice meditation or mindfulness. And these things are inexpensive, and a lot of times they're simply free. It's just a matter of locating them.
Yeah.
So I agree that budget can be an issue, but there are ways to address it. So wonderful. The next question I did have had to do with some of the resources that are available and tools, and to see if you had any suggestions or anything that you have utilized that's helped you build these programs and sustain them.
One of the things that I did that I didn't mention that was really, really helpful is finding people in the organization that are really passionate about mental wellness and physical, all the things. And so we put together kind of a community group, and there was the young lady that led it was a yoga instructor. And so she would have monthly yoga sessions for anybody that wanted to do it. They did them virtually as well because COVID, everybody was not in one place. But that group really took a lot of the work off, and they were really purposeful in providing awareness and newsletters and yoga and fitness and parties and things together, which really did bring the team together during a difficult time. So I think that's an opportunity. If someone doesn't have a budget, maybe find some advocates and build that camaraderie together.
Yeah. I would jump off that. If you're right, if budget is low, then it makes even more sense to actually listen to your people, because they're the ones that, while they may not have the answers, they are certainly the ones that are feeling the chaos and the disruption and the lack of leadership and the jobs that are too big for them. So listen to your people and put them in a room and allow them to do some problem solving, if you don't have a budget.
Wonderful suggestion. Definitely a wonderful way also to develop this well-being culture that I think we all strive for. We talked about empathy, we talked about humanity, we talked about leadership responsibility, but you just made a great point, David, about the employee engagement experience as well.
Your leadership may not see the chaos.
Correct.
They may think everything's perfectly normal.
Absolutely. And we need to sort of level set of where we are with our culture. Do that self-assessment. It may be a little bit painful, but there is an opportunity for us to grow and to learn, to collaborate, and move forward in a much more productive way. So I love that. With that said, here's a question for you, Brittany. What is one easy and actionable step that you believe every business could take to improve their workplace wellness?
Ooh, I would definitely say having leadership model the behavior, because it starts at the top, right? And so inviting leadership into conversations to have with their employees around reducing that stigma. It can be something as very simple as, a leader stating that they're going to take a mental health day to pause and reflect, or, maybe a leader mentioning that they were, talking to their therapist, right? So now that you mentioned that, you've just created this psychological safety for me as an employee to kind of go back to what I was saying earlier, to speak up about how I'm feeling in the workplace. So definitely modeling that behavior with care and with compassion and with psychological safety starting at the top.
Fantastic. Christy, what would you like to add to that?
I mean, I'm all aligned with what Brittany said. I think it's fantastic. I think one thing that an organization would take away is just that you don't have to have a seat at the top to impact change. That would be my one thing. Like, each individual person show up and be a good person. If you're a leader, show up and be a good person. Your behaviors are going to emulate that. Like, I love the framework. I think that's great if you got executive buy-in. But sometimes, junior team members can be a good example to seniors as well.
Absolutely. David?
Yeah, I would echo what Brittany and Chrissy said. You have to lead by example. So the more leadership works nights, works weekends, doesn't show up for dinner, doesn't see their kids, the more people under them are going to do the same. One of the things that causes burnout is the need to prove ourselves. And when somebody is running at 100 miles an hour and they are a leadership, whatever title they have, that's going to be subtly expected of that other person. So lead by example.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Our leaders heavily influence the culture we're in. We know that, and people pick that up. They become the norms and the behaviors of the organization, and you can see the social climate. It can have a very negative effect. And if you're the one who needs to leave by 5 and you do, you're now potentially considered a non-team member, right? So it is very important that we role model that behavior that we're looking for.
Angela, if I may, you and David just brought up a good point that I thought about. So I was with an organization that had this same exact problem that David's talking about. And I went to our CEO and I said, our team's burned out. The leadership is emailing them and pinging them at 10, 2, 3, like they are at dinner. They need to have, adequate timelines to get back. So what we did is we got with the leadership team and we created a framework for ways of working. And Fridays were get shit done days. Sorry for hacking HR from my mouth. But they were, and there were no meetings on Fridays. And that was to allow the team to actually execute the work because you're in so many meetings, right? But what we saw from that was kind of a raise of respect level, and also other leaders calling the other leaders out when they would do the bad behaviors. And so we started to see this balance start to take place and people becoming more engaged and purposeful. So it's a really, sorry, you just brought that up. I just remembered how impactful that moment was for us because the young lady that came to me, she was just completely stressed out. She didn't know what to do and showed me how many emails she was getting in text and all of it. And it was like, okay, ways of working, email here, text this, emergency only on this one. And we got everybody to row in the same direction.
I think there's also, let's talk mechanics for a second. If you're the CEO or you're the senior vice president and you want to work at 1 o'clock in the morning, have at it. Okay. But you can schedule your emails. You can go into Office or Gmail or what have you, talking about the mechanics of mental health. And you can say, right, I want to send this email now because I'm working at 1 in the morning, but I don't want it to go to my team till 10 a.m. Okay. You can do that. So think about the mechanics of mental health and how you're doing certain things that are causing stress in the workplace.
Love that. You're absolutely right. We should be utilizing technology to work for us, not for us to work for it, right?
Exactly.
Well, this whole thought about burnout and mental health, as we all know, there is quite a bit of stigma around this, and it really creates a hurdle for people reaching out. Sometimes when they do, they're further down the line than we had hoped, right? But there are upstream care programs. There's a variety of things, but I'm really interested in learning more about what you would think would be effective strategies that you can implement to reduce the stigma around mental health issues in the professional setting.
I'll say this. There hasn't been a single person I've ever talked to that was burned out that didn't come too late. So, and I don't mean too late, like, too late, morbid like, but they were already going through burnout for a very long time before they actually could muster up the will to actually talk with somebody. So organizations just need to understand what burnout looks like, even the early signs. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the complexities. I had a gentleman I interviewed for the book, and I asked everybody this: what are the signs of burnout? He said, David, one of the first signs of burnout is when you stop doing the things you love. So if you've got employees that stop maybe going out to lunch when they used to go out to lunch with other team members, or they gave up their golf membership, or they stopped going to baseball games or what have you, that's a clear indication that somebody's struggling. So at the very least, understand what burnout is looking like in the beginning stages.
Yeah. I could not agree with you more, David, about that, because I think it comes down to communication and education, right? And then also I think individuals need to learn self-regulation and to kind of feel in their body, their soul, their mind, like when they're having that burnout. Like you said, it's too late, because most people, I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of having lunch at my desk. I mean, look, our community, talent acquisition, HR, we have many colleagues that have been out of work for years now. Really amazing, beautiful people that have been out of work. And there's all these different reasons. So when they do find work, I think that they end up getting in an abusive work situation because they're so fearful of not having a job. Or maybe people in our industry stay in an unhealthy, toxic relationship with their job because they're afraid of what's not out there in the market right now, right? But I think we have to keep talking to each other, and the conversation has to keep being elevated. Like, thank you, Hacking HR. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Brittany and David, because it's an important topic, not just for work, but for every day. So education, communication, that's mine.
I like what you said about it's an important topic for every day. I like to think of mental health as a collective responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. Everything we do impacts somebody in some way, sometimes direct and sometimes it's indirect. But we should have it within us to know that we should not be impacting people negatively. So I do have another question. It's more about you and your magical wand. If you could take a magical wand and implement just one mental health initiative in an organization that you think would have an immediate impact on employees, what would that be?
I think I can take this one. I would definitely implement mental health awareness training. Of course, there would be one for our employees as well, because that would give them the opportunity to recognize, what those signs of burnout may be, and then help them, come up with strategies for overcoming them. But then I would also ensure that we are implementing a training for managers, right? And within this training, also ensuring that it emphasizes on psychological safety and how can we actually create these workplaces that are trauma informed. So helping managers recognize and realize and how to respond, as it relates to, what burnout may actually look like. Because at the end of the day, these are things that could impact the way that people actually show up on their day to day.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I just got the cue that it's our time to wrap up this summit. Thank you so much, first of all, to Hacking HR for putting this together. Thank you to all the panelists who participated, and thank you to everyone who has joined in these sessions. I hope you will take the time to peruse those sessions you may have missed and join in on the recordings. And we hope to see you again in a Hacking HR workshop. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.